That night the ancestral estate of the swordsman of Loyan was torn apart by flames. An enemy spear pierced the defender's body, and the courtyard was showered with a hail of arrows from the assassins of the Mjolman clan. Amid the scorched earth and corpses, a broken sword stood lonely. Zdorovilo, with a wild shriek, yanked the fallen victim by the hair, and mockingly asked if he now understood the price of loss. Several years later, in a dungeon, from beneath a dirty blindfold on the same man's eyes, a terrifying, insane smile spread. Shackled in chains, he straightened up amid a pillar of magical flame, and swore from now on to rule others' fates himself. In impenetrable darkness, something sinister was born. A bloody aura whistled up into the black sky. Thick fog crawled out from a crack in the rock. The space pulsed with heavy, suffocating energy. At the bottom of the cave, chained with massive chains to the walls, a bloodied prisoner knelt. From the darkness came a voice, mockingly greeting the great heir of the sword clan of Loyan. The young man, with a bloodied bandage over his eyes, was breathing heavily. He tried to lift his head, rattling the shackles. The executioner continued speaking, while the air struggled against the chains and emitted only muffled wheezes. A coarse hand grabbed his chin harshly. The stranger confessed that he had been watching him since the young man's tongue was torn out. The tortures continued. The prisoner screamed madly in pain, and the voice coldly remarked that this spectacle was not pleasant. The invisible enemy quietly said that now he could even hear the beating of his heart. From the darkness of the dungeon, full of bloodied hooks, a faint question sounded. Who had come? The chained prisoner jerked wildly and shouted that he could see nothing. The sinister voice reminded. His eyes had been burned with hot iron, and this was only the beginning. The executioner spoke about his tender hands, unaccustomed to hard labor, those delicate legs that only knew peaceful walks around the yard. They cut them off piece by piece, while he repeatedly fainted from wild pain. The mutilated body was dripping blood, but suddenly something clicked in the prisoner's consciousness. Memory began to return. He slowly raised his head. He mentally wondered how he could have forgotten that he had reached such a state. The voice mockingly threw that he was simply too fascinated with torture, and the space around was torn by a pillar of demonic energy. The prisoner listened indifferently as the executioner noted that he had been stuck here for a very long time. Wrapped in a mad crimson aura, the captive calmly asked if they knew what had happened to his family. The blind warrior was dripping blood when the enemy mockingly expressed surprise that he still cared about the fate of his family in his miserable state. The next phrase hit harder than a blade. His kin was completely destroyed. A sinister voice from the darkness ordered to remember everything. The young man froze, looking at the devastating wave of crimson energy, and memory again threw him back to that night when the estate burned to the ground. On the stone floor, in a pool of blood, lay the dead elder sister. She was beaten to death by her own husband, just because she refused to have dealings with him. The nightmare did not end there. The voice finished off, reminding about the second, noble sister. The wounded swordsman fell to his knees in the night forest, leaning on his weapon with his last strength and casting a fierce look ahead. From the darkness, two bald thugs with burning eyes were already approaching him, who came to take the girl as payment for the clan's desecration. The woman in blood-stained clothes stretched out her hand forward with her last strength. That same day she was torn apart by lustful bandits. The man chained up was choking on blood and shouting that he knew nothing, since the clan still had valiant warriors and younger brothers. The bloody aura thickened into a muffled question. Was he really that blind? The invisible judge reminded that as soon as he, the eldest son, left the family and went to the in-laws, a fratricidal war immediately broke out for the vacant position of the head, which left behind only piles of mutilated bodies. And all this time, he was simply alienatedly flipping through the pages. He sat in the silence of the office and stubbornly ignored the obvious. The prisoner plaintively whimpered that he was only a mere mortal and honestly could not have foreseen such horror. The voice exploded. The pitiful excuse about a mere mortal only enraged him, and the fury tore the space with red lightning. A powerful burst of energy erased this lie to dust. Suddenly, memory threw out an image from the distant past. A gentle female smile. At just 4 years old, he went through hundreds of intricate medical treatises, brilliantly condensing them into 25 perfect volumes. At 5, he was already standing with a massive scroll in his hands, confidently dictating new agricultural methods to the emperor. And at 6 years old, having read the signs in the starry sky, he prepared in advance for the great drought and saved tens of thousands of people from a hungry death. The man bound in chains froze before a gigantic entity of crimson energy. The demon contemptuously mocked the names of ancient scholars, To him, they were merely pitiful insects. The monster asked if he now remembered everything, but the captive remained silent. The weary and blinded warrior quietly replied that, in fact, he had always known everything and missed nothing. In the black sky, a bloody dawn of heavenly punishment flared up, under which he was born. A memory pierced. His dark silhouette with a sword towered on a mountain of debris amid hellish flames. He avoided battles because he understood that any of his interference in worldly affairs would flood everything with blood. The demon laughed horrifically. Could it be that he still understood nothing? The essence struck cruelly with the truth. All his loved ones were already dead, and the cursed fate had finally come true. Bleeding on his knees, the prisoner bitterly admitted that he had not been able to break the chains of fate. But suddenly a mad smile spread across his battered face. If so, then he had no choice but to remain a prisoner. A sharp, bloody hook gleamed predatory in the darkness of the dungeon. They say the heavenly nets are rare, but they release no one. Not even those who decide to stand aside. The bloody prisoner hung on chains, stubbornly believing that heavenly karma would surely punish the villains. From the darkness emerged a terrifying clawed hand, mocking his naivety. The man with blindfolded eyes snarled fiercely, dispersing a whirl of red aura around himself. The ominous voice sneered. Could it be that the heavens care about miserable people? The prisoner sharply raised his head and croaked. If he really wants to see karma, then he will tell him one story. A sharp rumble sounded. The vision threw them into the past, where above sunlit mountains soared a fiery phoenix. It was an era of deep antiquity, the time of ancient myths. Back then, people devoutly believed in a higher order and sought enlightenment near giant stone statues. They lived in constant fear of the judgment of the underworld, knowing exactly that sins would have to be paid for. Fanatics exhausted their own bodies, meditating for years under icy waterfalls. They all blindly held on to this truth. But while the righteous suffered, the true scoundrels continued to do evil, bathing unpunished in gold and luxury until the very end. Most good people cried out to the heavens in despair. They lived in endless suffering and died without reaching their age. The exhausted old man walked alone through the wasteland among bleached bones. His flesh literally crumbled into sand. Those whose time had run out returned to the earth without a trace, becoming ordinary dust. What karma could be spoken of in this terrible illusion? There was nothing left around except merciless, inhuman skies. Suddenly, a powerful flash of crimson aura tore through the space. The prisoner, bound by massive chains, finally understood. There is no just judgment. He bitterly laughed through clenched teeth, repeating about heavenly punishment and the higher court. His bloodied face was distorted by a terrifying smile. All this justice turned out to be just a pathetic invention of those who had nothing left to hope for. And then from the pulsating red darkness came the question, do you want to gain power? And through clenched teeth came the sound, yes. The wounded warrior with a bandage over his eyes breathed heavily, gritting his teeth from the fierce tension. A gigantic dark entity loomed over him, asking if he truly wished to change everything and save everyone. A brief confirmation once again cut through the silence. The entity exploded with crimson light, warning that for this, his soul would suffer eternally. A dark hand rested on his face, and he desperately shouted that he was ready to accept this power and seize his chance. Energy pulsed, and the very oath to rule others' fates finally sounded aloud. In the complete darkness, a voice sounded. It was time to see the true self. An unknown power surged at him in a devastating torrent. A whirlwind of black and red magic engulfed the space. The man snarled fiercely, letting this terrifying aura into himself. Suddenly, his body shuddered from a sharp impulse, muscles tensed. From the epicenter of energy, the final command rang out. Open your eyes. The bandage slipped, and a demonic smile lit up the face, while the single open eye blazed with ominous magic. From the bloody darkness came the command to look at him. A dry clinking of chains rolled across the cracked earth. A heavy step. Bare wounded feet stepped through the emptiness as the voice recited the sacred scripture, the cover of which was created by the enemy of humanity. The youth in rags slowly walked forward. The pages of this book were written in the blood of the one who held a grudge against the heavens. He walked, listening as the folio was sewn with the tendons of the enemy of the land. A bloodied hand reached for the pulsating book. Though their goals differed, their paths finally converged. The folio of living flesh offered to make a pact in exchange for a new chance. The youth's eye flashed in the shadow, and he unhesitatingly gave them his soul. Suddenly, the space was torn by a sharp flash of crimson aura. A pillar of energy burst from his body towards a new fate. A wild stream of power scattered his hair. In bloody splashes, the true name of the artifact was revealed. the secret book that shakes the heavens. In the hellish flame, souls writhed as a mysterious voice cast aside the indifferent karma of the heavens. Bony hands intertwined. A new scripture appeared, capable of absorbing all evil and defying the gods themselves. The ancient folio hovered before the young man, demanding an answer. Was he ready to mercilessly punish villains according to their deeds? Energy struck with dazzling light, asking if he wanted to turn everything back and save everyone. The essence recognized his determination, shared its power, and gave him a new chance. From now on, his fate became utter darkness. The boy's body bent sharply as a black-purple aura surged into his veins. His gaze froze. A predatory smile appeared on his face. From the shadows, he would administer judgment with the sword of retribution. A dark folio firmly lay in the palms. Thus was born the Lord of Darkness, who vowed to punish this world for all its sins. From the chambers of the great heir of the Loyan sword clan, a dazzling pillar of light struck the sky. The morning sun calmly illuminated the courtyard through the open door. In bed, a young man with long, dark hair slept peacefully. A sudden flash. The eyes snapped open sharply. He jumped up on the bed, staring shockingly into space. Fingers clenched the blanket with a death grip. A hoarse, broken breath burst from the chest. Cold sweat rolled down the cheek. The young man gasped for air with his mouth. Suddenly, he turned sharply. A worried glance slid across the room. Seeing the familiar shelves with scrolls, he immediately recognized the place. The young man froze in complete confusion. This was his own room in the Wangak Pavilion. A bare foot quietly stepped onto the wooden floor. He was truly given another chance. The young man looked into the mirror and froze. From there he saw himself, but much younger. He was sent back to the past, to 17 years old, before all the bloody tragedies began. He touched his own chest in disbelief. Suddenly, a voice came from outside. Someone from the servants was asking if the great heir had awakened. Memory immediately brought the truth about his current miserable status in the strongest sword clan of the Central Plains. Behind the door, they were openly gossiping, saying, "What difference does it make if this failure without talent for weapons just buries himself in books again?" The men laughed, recalling old rumors about his genius, not hiding their contempt. The young man listened gloomily to their conversation. The clan's rooms had the best soundproofing, yet he heard every whisper. A black aura suddenly burst from his body. Not only his thoughts changed, his eyes flashed with white light from the sharp sharpening of all 5 senses. Physical strength increased many times over, flooding the muscles with dark power. A moment of silence. Now, in this innocent body, awakened the one whose bones are thoroughly soaked with demonic energy, an insatiable thirst for blood. Wrapped in a dark aura, he realized that in such a form one cannot go outside, and began smoothing the wrinkles on his forehead. Touching his face with pulsating black veins, he tried to pull a more human expression over his terrifying smile. In the darkness, he suddenly froze, cutting himself off mid-sentence. His face was distorted by a predatory grimace with sharp fangs. But what does this human even mean? Quietly snorting, he dismissed the senseless thoughts. For now the face looked quite decent. His features completely changed, transforming into a calm, handsome face with clear blue eyes. Through thick, black-purple smoke flashed a decision. Time to start. Dark clouds of energy reluctantly dispersed. Bare feet confidently stepped onto the wooden floor. With a loud creak, he flung open the massive door, letting in dazzling blue light. The hems of white clothing flashed as he took a decisive step over the threshold. A lone green leaf swirled smoothly in the air. White silence. A breeze rustled the green leaves with a noise. The young man in white attire froze with closed eyes, relaxedly catching the air. Suddenly he shuddered and sharply exhaled. His gaze confusedly slid over the blurred roof of the manor. He slowly walked forward, stretching his neck, while the old servant with a broom cautiously asked if he had already woken up. 2 men immediately bowed deeply before the great heir. The space around was flooded with dazzling sunlight, but the boy simply walked past, not taking his enchanted gaze off the sky. The servant blinked in confusion and turned to follow him. The men exchanged puzzled glances, grumbling that their young master is always daydreaming, and today, since early morning, he simply cannot come to his senses. The youth smoothly stretched out his hand towards the rays. The sun gently outlined his peaceful face. He calmly noted that the drink was warm. A sharp shout interrupted the blissful moment. He cold-bloodedly ordered to summon all his people. The servant was sweating from shock. Soon a considerable crowd gathered in the yard. openly irritated by the interrupted rest. Complaints about the incomprehensible commotion poured in from everywhere. People openly grumbled, calling the great heir a lousy sheep dragging the clan down. One of the elders disdainfully spat. The heir finally broke the silence and calmly asked if everyone was present. He slowly looked around. There was not a drop of emotion in his gaze, only piercing coldness, and a short, merciless order was given. For a moment, the court fell silent and motionless. The subordinates were instantly overwhelmed by panic. They desperately shouted that they could not be simply expelled. The court erupted in hysteria and fear of disgrace. Watching this pitiful chaos, he thought of only one thing: how foolish he had been in the past. Bloody darkness enveloped his memories of the times when he naively believed that good would always be met with good. He hoped that even through a deaf wall, his sincerity would someday surely prevail. He really wanted to believe, until a mocking smile touched his lips. The subordinates gawked at him in stunned silence. The young man in white clothing suddenly burst into a mad laugh, covering his face with his palm. Throwing back his hair, he looked down wearily and disdainfully called out to one of those present. The frightened elder man immediately responded, respectfully calling him the great heir of the Sword Lohan clan. Yan So-hyun confirmed his title in an icy tone, towering over the subordinate. A heavy silence hung in the air. His predatory grin stretched even wider as he quietly asked if this worm dared to defy orders and place himself above the heir. The servants' eyes nearly popped out of their sockets from animalistic terror. The heir calmly noted that punishment depends on the degree of disobedience. At the mention of severed hands or ankles, the old man's knees trembled. With a run-up, he fell to his knees and pressed his face into the floor, frantically begging for mercy. The old man shuddered and swallowed convulsively, breaking out in a cold sweat. The men fell to their knees with a crash, crying out for their wives and children who needed to be fed. They desperately smashed their foreheads against the floor, begging the heir for at least a drop of mercy. In response, the young man only barely smiled and put a finger to his lips. The entire courtyard sprawled before him in bows. He turned away, mentally marveling that everything turned out to be so simple. With one move, he cleanly got rid of foreign spies, and even shifted the blame onto their own carelessness. The verdict was short: pack your things and get out. The heir calmly threw them another demand as they left. The servant raised his tear-streaked face and gasped in hysterical thanks, asking to convey their words to the administration. The administration was to carefully select and send him a child for services. The heir nodded kindly and promised that he himself would deliver the Lord's order. While the traitors were scrambling to their feet, he relaxedly raised his palm to the sunlight. Amid their frantic cries, the young man gazed mesmerized at the reddish glow of his own hand, acknowledging that all this was indeed extremely strange. He covered his face with his hand, bitterly asking himself if even the sun had turned away from him forever. A voice in his consciousness pronounced a verdict. From now on, he would breathe darkness and administer justice with the sword of retribution. He was proclaimed the new Lord of Darkness, who would punish this world for all its sins. In the void, the name of his new destructive power was engraved. Meanwhile, far away, a messenger descended onto a luxurious carpet. He brought an urgent report. What he heard made the Lord tense up. The great heir had suddenly destroyed all their spies in the Wangak pavilion. The servant froze in a deep bow. Before the master's eyes appeared images of his shadow pawns, who had just been mercilessly slaughtered. The room was flooded with a heavy aura of anger. How dare he? The Lord snapped, not believing such audacity. The tension reached its limit. The wave from this incident quickly rolled to the office of the Lioan Sword Clan. The gray-haired official at the table grimly acknowledged the inevitable. The heir, who had hidden for 10 years behind the mask of an indifferent recluse, finally showed his fangs. The chief secretary clasped his fingers tightly, sinking gloomily into memories. That youth with the training sword would not leave his thoughts. It was enough just to see how the boy took a fighting stance. A devastating swing cut through the air, raising a powerful whirlwind. Then the secretary and his men simply froze in shock. These were the movements of a master who was already standing at the very top. That cold, focused gaze. The old man realized that the time for mere observation had passed, when suddenly the silence was broken by the voice of Chona's servant. The secretary flinched from surprise and turned to the door. He immediately composed himself and ordered the guest to come closer for a serious conversation. The servant silently moved forward, listening as the master confessed that he had always valued him and carefully chosen a master for him. But now the time had come to act and complete the postponed matter. The secretary stated directly, "The inheritance structure of the Sword Clan will soon change drastically, and the great heir will find himself at the center of this storm. The old man's eyes dangerously narrowed as he offered the servant to make a choice and go to the Wangok pavilion. Instead of words, he only tensed and clenched the fabric of his clothing until his knuckles turned white. She firmly promised to carry out the chief secretary's order, and the voice in response assured that her eyes would allow her to administer justice swiftly. The girl's golden gaze burned with unwavering determination. Addressing His Majesty, the interlocutor added, "She will be able to see even the most secret thoughts of the great heir." The girl froze before the gigantic residence of the great heir, near the gates where the guard was bored. She could not take her eyes off the majestic building. Rumors about the scale of the Wangok pavilion were not exaggerated. It was truly impressive. Old instructions came to mind. The power of the clan is recognized precisely by its main gates, even if the heir himself lives as a recluse. As soon as she approached closer, one of the guards lazily scratched the back of his head, blinking sleepily with displeasure. The girl introduced herself as the new servant by order of the chief secretary, mentally surprised by the audacity of the guard, who was calmly sleeping in broad daylight. Suddenly she shuddered. The guards stood up, and the space around them unexpectedly vibrated with the dense aura of true martial arts masters. Everything fell into place. The legitimate heir of the Sword Clan simply could not be guarded by ordinary infantry. The girl quickly composed herself and firmly looked the guard in the eyes, confirming her status. As proof of her words, she extended an official scroll with the order. But the man did not even look at the paper. He just yawned widely and lazily gave the command to let her through. She was quite irritated by such blatant negligence of the elite fighters. Two guards leaned on the massive wooden doors, loudly opening the way to the residence before her. The girl quietly hummed. Light pierced through the branches amid the loud noise of the wind. She sharply looked back over her shoulder. In her memory, the voice of the bearded man surfaced, who suddenly realized he forgot to warn about the main thing. Under no circumstances leave the forest path, she recalled, and tensed, freezing as she felt a heavy rumble from the thickets. The girl carefully walked along the illuminated road, surrounded on all sides by darkness. Sweat appeared on her face. This was far from an ordinary forest path. She looked up in surprise, struck by the unprecedented complexity of the magical formation. Her pupil flashed gold. If not for this sight, it was terrifying to imagine how it would all end. The trees of the Wangok pavilion intertwined into a single living forest. Just the sight of this trap made one uneasy. It seemed the dense darkness was ready at any moment to crush her like a small insect. She walked alone, along the narrow, saving corridor of light, through the deadly aura. And from the darkness behind her, they were already watching closely. An invisible observer noted that before him was an ordinary girl without a shred of inner strength. Nothing more. Nothing less. Walking along the path, he could not understand how she managed to notice the hidden barrier of the Wangok pavilion. Suddenly the woman tensed. She sharply turned around. The air before her rippled with small, flickering waves. From the forest thicket, radiating a powerful aura, a mysterious man emerged. He approached and coldly asked how she had managed to see him at all. A predatory smile stretched across his lips. The girl seemed truly unusual to him. She froze from surprise and fear. At that moment, the stranger's eye flashed with dazzling gold. Reality cracked, and the girl was instantly pulled into absolute, deaf darkness, where absolutely nothing could be seen. In the black void, a barely noticeable blue flame suddenly flickered. Ahead, a light flashed, and a desperate hope flashed through her. But instead of rescue, a terrible face distorted with rage emerged from the darkness, whose single blue eye burned through. A sharp sound tore through the darkness. The girl screamed in fear, finding herself chest deep in icy black water. The surface rippled, and from the depths, eerie hands silently reached out. Bony fingers tore upward predatorily. Her frantic scream sounded. Dozens of slimy palms greedily grabbed the girl. Shadows clamped her mouth and mercilessly dragged her to the bottom, while in her wide-open eyes, animal terror struggled. Her trembling hand reached for the light one last time with a silent plea. Her strength vanished, and she went under the water, finally losing hope. Suddenly, someone's strong palm firmly grasped her wrist. The young man, with one powerful jerk, pulled the girl out of the otherworldly trap. He carefully lifted the weakened girl into his arms, calmly and attentively looking into her face. The young man mentally noted. The chief secretary had sent him a truly interesting person. Sun rays softly flooded the table with spread-out coins and porcelain dishes. On the wide bed, the girl was sleeping peacefully. She slowly sat up, throwing off the blanket. Glancing around the room, she thought, "The place is modest, but true nobility is immediately felt." Just stepping onto the floor, the girl accidentally kicked a stack of books. Her gaze instantly fixed on the find. She took the thick volume into her hands. Her eyes widened in surprise. The girl hurriedly flipped page after page. The volume contained absolutely everything, from the medicine of all the clans of the country to sword techniques. Turning to the massive shelves, the girl froze. It turned out that absolutely all the books in this room were the same. It simply did not fit in her mind. Sacred scriptures, which should have been strictly guarded in the imperial palace, lay right here. She froze from shock, and a drop of sweat rolled down her cheek. Suddenly, something interrupted her thoughts, making her look around her shoulder in confusion. Her golden eyes suddenly widened. A hand pushed the wooden frame. The doors opened, and dazzling light burst into the room, along with a swarm of petals. The girl stood stunned at the threshold. Before her stretched a magnificent sunlit city, over which cherry blossoms flew. She looked around in amazement. Outside, winter still held, but here, absolute spring reigned. Suddenly, someone asked if she had slept well. Below stood a stately, dark-haired young man, calmly calling her to come down. The realization struck instantly. Before her was the great heir himself. A solitary petal silently fell to the ground. The girl looked at him as if enchanted. She quickly and clearly breathed out her agreement. A little later, she dared to ask if his name was really Chona. The young man in the chair calmly confirmed this, then straightforwardly added that she had turned out to be quite heavy. The girl blinked confusedly, barely remembering how she had fainted in the forest. Memory supplied a fragment. She falls right into the arms of a stranger. The rescuer calmly explained that he had picked her up in time during her walk. Otherwise, she would have simply frozen to death. A brief pause hung in the air. The girl fell into a low bow, feverishly swearing to give her life for her salvation. But the young man sharply rebuked her. He did not ask for service. He suspiciously squinted, clutching a scroll in his hand. Had the chief secretary sent her to spy on the great heir? The scroll fell with a dull thud right at her feet. She sharply raised her gaze, covered in cold sweat. The girl humbly begged for forgiveness, assuring that she was not worthy of life. The heir sat relaxed in the chair, and ironically remarked that she was asking for death too quickly after he had saved her. The folds of her clothing barely moved. The girl did not retreat, and passionately promised to do anything for him. And the heir, looking into her golden eyes, finally became convinced. This was the very woman from his past life. Then their paths had never crossed directly. A slight smile played on the young man's lips from such a strange game of fate. She was called the Golden-Eyed Witch. But now this formidable witch blinked confusedly, sitting submissively before the young man, who casually asked if she knew how to cook. It was rumored that men lost their heads over her at a single glance. The hot flame crackled in the stove. The girl wearily sank to the kitchen floor, scolding herself for that sudden loss of consciousness in the forest. Suddenly, a terrifying image of a predatory face with a glowing eye flashed before her eyes. Could it really have just been a dream? She exhaled long and heavily. A sharp slap on her own cheeks instantly knocked out unnecessary thoughts. Now she needed to focus exclusively on cooking. Gathering her willpower, the girl confidently took up the kitchen knife. The blade rhythmically tapped on the board, and one question beat in her mind. How could a person who so easily broke her composure not know how to wield a sword at all? Her new master abruptly interrupted her thoughts, silently appearing from behind in anticipation of cutlets for dinner. The witch jumped aside in fright, trying to argue that there were far more important things than food right now. But the young man only smiled carefreely and ordered her not to delay the work, because he was terribly hungry. The embarrassed and tense girl could only swallow her pride and obediently wished the master a good meal. The table was laden with hot dishes, and the man sincerely praised the girl for her quick work. He calmly invited her to sit at the table. She flatly refused, preparing to wait until he finished the meal. The man's gaze instantly grew serious. He coldly ordered her not to make him repeat twice. The girl had to comply and tensely sit opposite him. He picked up an appetizing meatball with chopsticks and transferred it directly into her bowl. She froze in discomfort, not daring to taste the food first. The man insisted, with a brief word. The girl obediently bit off a piece, and he immediately asked if it was tasty. She quietly confirmed. Then he decided to try it himself. The man threw food into his mouth. His face instantly brightened. He praised the deep flavor and contentedly demanded more. He extended the empty bowl. Smiling contentedly, he calmly demanded another portion. Night had long fallen on the estate, but demands for more continued to echo from the room, until the frightened servants reported that the rice in the house had run out. He dryly clicked the chopsticks on the table and reasoned that a slight hunger was even better now. Leaving behind a pile of licked plates, he refused tea in favor of wine, which finally stunned the maid. Looking at the full moon, he could not understand why, after so many dishes, his stomach was still empty. Lonely, settling on the edge of the roof, he recalled the secret book that shakes the heavens. A guess struck his head. This was the price for the demon who distorts time and fate. It turned out the cost was only insatiable hunger, and at this thought, he smiled crookedly. Suddenly, terrifying hands emerged from the darkness and clung tightly to his head, while within his consciousness a voice screamed wildly, begging for fate. The eye suddenly flashed violet. A black demonic aura exploded from his body, rising as a dense column into the night sky. The shadow completely covered his eyes, leaving only an icy, threatening calm on his face. A terrifying black creature approached close to his face, grinning with a predatory smile. In the darkness, a sinister voice echoed. The time of fate has finally come. A heavy boot thundered into the ground under the maniacal call to enjoy the battle. In the complete darkness, only a thin trace of bloody energy flickered. Wrapped in a violet whirlwind, the young man snarled fiercely. The space exploded with a powerful violet flash, greedily proclaiming the start of the bloody banquet. The cold, full moon hung in the dark sky. In the city of Nyan, life thrived only in the brightly lit tavern. A haughty guest in a blue robe authoritatively demanded a table, waving off the host's pleas about the crowded hall. Disdainfully pushing away the frightened owner, the man brazenly strode deeper into the room. Suddenly he froze. His eyes widened in horror, and cold sweat rolled down his temple. From the darkness came a dreadful smacking sound. Someone greedily tearing a moist mass with their teeth. Pale fingers cracked as they tore apart another piece. At the table sat a black-haired young man with a mad look, obsessively stuffing food into himself with his bare hands. The table was drowning in piles of empty plates, but the boy was dully fixated on only one thing. He still wanted more. His terrifying demand for a new portion finally broke the guest's confidence. The rich man's knees pathetically trembled as he realized who was in front of him. He screamed wildly throughout the tavern about the hungry spirit Agvi from hell, and at the very next moment, he fled. He greedily bit into the food, muttering irritably that it was not enough, and it was not the right thing at all. Suddenly, he stood up sharply. His eyes flashed with cold determination. The young man headed for the exit, dragging an oppressive dark aura behind him. The visitors at the tables froze, watching him with horror. Heavy footsteps echoed in their ears. He asked dryly how much he owed. The owner of the establishment shrank under his piercing gaze. From animal fear, the old man became drenched and completely lost the power of speech. Smiling crookedly, the boy decided mentally that the payment left would be enough. He pressed a heavy pouch into trembling palms, hearing a timid wish for a safe journey called after him. As soon as he disappeared behind the door, the frightened men sighed with relief and rushed to sprinkle salt on the threshold against ghosts. This whole situation looked too strange. Left alone under the glow of the full moon, he gloomily admitted, no matter how much he ate, the hellish hunger did not recede. Black energy swirled around the young man as he pondered how to satisfy his hunger. In his imagination, dozens of exhausted hands were already reaching out to him. He asked himself if he had turned into a real hungry spirit from hell. He sharply shook his head, driving away the manna. Suddenly his gaze sharpened, and his nostrils caught a distinct smell of blood. A predatory, toothy smile instantly spread across his face. His body flared with a powerful violet aura. He clearly felt where this incredibly tasty aroma was coming from. Meanwhile, silence reigned on the city street at night. A dull blow suddenly shattered the peace. The bloodied man was cruelly thrown onto the cobblestones for daring to cheat their master out of money. Two bandits from Chorna Kistka menacingly loomed over the victim. Beaten and with his last strength, he crawled forward, cursing these filthy leeches for their usurious interest. A heavy boot came down with a swing, accompanied by a shout to be silent. A painful scream sounded as the body cracked under the merciless blow. The leader irritably ordered his subordinates to take the token and leave. The bandit's hand took the wooden plaque, while the beaten debtor weakly bled on the floor. The villain grinned fiercely. This piece of wood gave him the right to legally sell not only the man, but his entire family and lands. In despair, the victim clung to the offender's leg, begging to spare his relatives, but heard only a reproach about the overdue debt. The leader rudely kicked the poor man aside. He disgustedly thought that you can't earn from the old man, but his descendants would go for a good price. Licking his lips, the sadist added, if selling the children doesn't work out, he will take them himself. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. A wave of violet energy pierced the darkness, causing the bandits to sharply turn around. Genuine shock was reflected on the extortionists' faces. The leader nervously shouted, demanding the stranger immediately step into the light. His bald accomplice panicked and grabbed his head, emitting only a muffled groan. A terrifying aura forced the bandits to their knees beside their victim, and an unknown voice ordered everyone to be silent. The mysterious young man loomed over them and harshly cut off the pitiful attempts of the bandit to object. Sweat rolled down the leader's face. He was struck by the power of the stranger, capable of stirring the human soul with a single whistle. He cautiously asked if the stranger had any business with them. The man tensed and clenched his palms tightly. Behind him, 2 more fighters instantly lined up, ready for battle. A drop of sweat rolled down his tense neck. The leader's hands trembled treacherously as he respectfully bowed and asked the guest to finally show his face. A boot emerged from the darkness. Hollow step. A long-haired young man stepped into the light, whose eye blazed with violet fire, and whose body was enveloped by a swirling dark aura. He loomed over the frightened leader with an icy smile. The youth's eyes gleamed predatory. He sensed exactly that delicious scent he was searching for. He whispered that he had finally found it, chillingly baring his fangs. At that very moment, the dark silhouette suddenly lunged forward, catching the leader by surprise. Fingers convulsively gripped the katana's hilt, and a muffled, desperate scream sounded. Die! The youth easily intercepted that fist, not wiping the grin off his face. Bloody black flashes cut through the air from a series of swift strikes. The hand in white firmly grabbed the attacker's wrist, silencing his pitiful cries for mercy. The enemy convulsively gasped, flooding the floor with blood. His bald accomplice screamed in terror, seeing his brother trapped in a deadly snare. The long-haired youth with shining eyes pulled the victim towards himself and pierced her through with dark energy. A predatory, toothy smile stretched across his bloodied face. He whispered with satisfaction that it was delicious. The killer slowly turned away, radiating dense purple gloom. The distorted corpse thudded heavily to the ground. From the youth's back exploded a gigantic mass of shadows, ominously looming over the 2 surviving enemies. From the epicenter of darkness, twisted ghostly hands sharply reached out. They gripped the head of the slain with a deathly clutch. A gigantic tentacle of gloom whistled downward. It slammed into the ground with a crash, completely erasing the remains of the body. The youth looked back over his shoulder, and with a creepy smile said that 2 were left. The bald bandit dashed full speed under the downpour, frantically shouting about the monster behind him. The second bandit caught the scream and tore after him at full speed. Directly above him grew a gigantic demonic entity with burning eyes. Cold sweat drenched his face. A bloodied hand fell to the ground. The bald partner froze, convulsively repeating that it was all just a terrible dream. A jerk, and he rushed to flee, stepping over the mutilated body. Under the blood-red moon, the bald man burst into a frantic scream, swallowed by darkness. Shadows swiftly caught up with the second fugitive. He pressed himself against the closed door and desperately called for help. But horned silhouettes were already approaching him. Broken by horror, the bald man howled, asking why, of all the scum in the world, the monster came for them. From the darkness emerged a young man in white, completely covered in blood, and with a terrifying purple gleam in his eyes. He leaned close to the victim's very face and bared sharp teeth. You are only the beginning. In the complete darkness, a wide demonic smile flashed. A blood-red streak cut through the solid darkness, leaving behind only the final credits. The young man in white clothing lay motionless on the broken stone. With a groan, he opened his eyes and grabbed his head, trying to drive away the pain. The last memory, leaving the tavern. Suddenly, a rumble sounded, and massive stone coffins trembled all around. He instantly realized this was an underground tomb. From the nearest sarcophagus, a dried-up corpse with a burning red eye jumped out with a wild scream. The young man calmly assessed the undead creature that was already preparing to leap. He smoothly stepped back, wondering who could have created such a thing. From the darkness came the thought that such composure truly suits one of the fates of the secret book that shakes the heavens. From the thick darkness emerged a terrifying old man in a hood, wrapped in a purple magical aura. His bony hand rested on his belt, concentrating dark energy. The hero looked the necromancer straight in the eyes and mockingly declared that his voice smelled of mold. In response, only a hoarse, satisfied laugh echoed. The young man smiled boldly, openly mocking the rotten teeth of his interlocutor. Instead of rage, the old man only laughed hoarsely. This cheeky boy definitely appealed to him. In the complete darkness, violet sparks flared up. In the silence, the monster leaned closer, burning the guest with a crimson gaze. He asked what exactly the impudent one knew about the secret book that shakes the heavens. The young man slowly repeated the name, the secret book that shakes the heavens. The young man calmly replied that it was an ancient, demonic artifact, capable of rewinding time into the past, and then unexpectedly folded his hands in a respectful bow, asking to share the true knowledge. The demon's eye opened wide in surprise. All previous candidates for possessing the book had always behaved quite predictably. This young man turned out to be completely different. The boy raised a sharp gaze, feeling that he had finally earned the respect of this being. The old man burst into laughter again, and unexpectedly admitted he himself did not fully understand the true power of this book. The elder in the hood croaked about ancient deities, who supposedly created this thing from sacrificed madmen. His bony fingers trembled. No one knew the true origin of the artifact. At his guest's question, the crimson eye flashed fiercely in the darkness, and the old man said, "Because I am also a deity." A dense purple aura swirled in the air. More precisely, he bitterly corrected himself. He once was one. The young man was silent, listening as the once mighty being confessed to his fall to the very bottom. The old man's red eyes feverishly narrowed at the memories of the endless labyrinth, where every solved mystery bred new riddles. Even now he was blind. The young man shuddered. The former god studied this book for countless epochs and still ended up with nothing. The old man gloomily added that countless people had tried to conquer the demonic thing, but they failed. They all shone like stars until they were swallowed by the bloody abyss. Suddenly his face twisted into a mad grin. It was in this boy that he saw a spark of hope. The young man froze in confusion when the old man announced that the initiation ritual had quietly ended, and there was no turning back. He calmly opened his eyes and lowered his gaze onto the skull wrapped in violet flames. From the thick darkness emerged a gigantic face, with a burning eye that mockingly asked why he had not yet devoured them. The young man sharply turned to the dark silhouette in the hood. The violet abyss swirled. A sudden invisible blow cut through his chest, splashing blood generously. He heavily sank into the darkness, but in a moment he rose to his feet. His face was hidden by a black eyeless mask, and spiked shadow wings burst from behind his back. The darkness throbbed dully. Eventually the mask fell off, and he realized a strange thing. Although this blasphemous method contradicted the heavenly order, the unbearable hunger finally disappeared. This was the first and last demand that the secret book made to fate itself. On the stone platform before him sat a weary spirit with a predatory smile. A vision of infernal torments flashed by. He was offered to challenge the indifferent heavens and devour all the world's darkness himself. This absorption was not a metaphor. The spirit explained that from now on, these shadowy hands would literally help him devour prey in the expanded demonic zone. At that very moment, dozens of black hands gripped his bloodied face with a deathly grasp. Darkness whistled as it flew into the abyss. The grim old man in the hood snarled predatory. Their time was up. He dissolved into the violet gloom, throwing a final promise of a quick meeting and wishes for a good hunt. The young man endured that gaze with icy calm. At that very moment, the cave around began to collapse with a rumble. The last stone strike, and the space suddenly drowned in white light. A peaceful sunny morning illuminated the roofs of the magnificent residence. The maid stopped in front of the sliding doors and quietly reported that she had brought tea. She was used to hearing only a cold order to leave the tray at the threshold in response. But now everything was different. The girl froze in confusion. The huge bedroom of the great heir resembled a dump. The floor was completely covered with priceless bamboo scrolls. Anyone else would guard such secret treatises, like the apple of their eye. But this young man openly ignored all the rules. Instead of the expected arrogance, he took up preparing breakfast for both of them with a joyful smile. The heir skillfully tossed shrimp in the pan, feeling surprisingly natural by the stove, as if there were no chasm between their statuses. Chona looked tensely at the full table, not believing that they would really dine together. The great heir smiled warmly and corrected her. Not only today, but from now on, always. She tried to remind him of her place as an ordinary maid, but the master calmly ordered her simply to eat. The girl glanced at him from behind and was convinced he had no romantic interest in her. The situation completely confused her. Because of her incredible beauty, Chona was nicknamed Ice Flower, and the cruel second and third heirs had long set their sights on her. All their women disappeared without a trace, so the indifference of the current lord became a true salvation for her. And yet she continued to doubt whether it was worth hiding from them here, trusting the advice of the chief secretary. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud, heavy step. A scarred subordinate burst into the room, nervously scratching the back of his head with an urgent message. Chona sharply sprang up, outraged by such impudence during the Lord's meal, who calmly continued eating. The warrior awkwardly shrank under her angry gaze, trying to explain his sudden visit. Her outrage instantly turned to shock at what she heard. The master of the 3 martial arts from the main house had personally come to them. The scarred warrior blinked in confusion. The girl tensed sharply. The masters of the 3 martial arts answer exclusively to the 3rd heir. The man reported that the guest demanded to bring the maid who came yesterday. The 2nd and 3rd heirs were already openly competing for her. The time had finally come. She flared up with indignation. How dare some subordinate so bluntly command the personal servant of the great heir? The scarred one sighed guiltily, replying that he had also objected at first. However, the guest covered himself with a direct order, leaving him no choice. Someone's fingers impatiently struck the table. A short command to go was heard. The girl froze in surprise, hearing the master order her to simply find out the essence of the matter to stop this noise. He himself did not even look away from the book. Her eyes narrowed with anger, for the 3rd heir brazenly ignored all procedures, trying to take her by force. The maid bowed submissively and headed for the exit, when the master's sharp shout suddenly stopped the scarred one. He fearfully pointed at himself with a finger, and heard an icy question. Who even allowed him to come in here? The master stood up and coldly cut off, saying that excuses about known prohibitions would not work here if the guest had still broken inside. The warrior with the red band, covered in sweat, began to stammer excuses. Supposedly, the messenger always stood by the gate, but after yesterday, no one was left. The long-haired youth in white only indifferently touched his chin. Does the absence of a guard give the right to break in without permission? The subordinate instantly dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness, and the Lord agreed to give him a chance. But he set a strict condition. From now on, this warrior himself becomes the messenger, and will stand guard indefinitely at the main gates. The stunned man only managed to squeeze out a confused question, while the master coldly dictated new restrictions. The youth with a book in his hands calmly turned away. Then he threw a sly smile over his shoulder, and suggested doing it his own way if the order was not to his liking. Clenching his teeth from the humiliating demotion, the subordinate obediently bowed his head. Trembling with fear, he hurried as fast as he could to get out of the room. The old swordsman raged in the middle of the courtyard, outraged by such disrespect to the guest. Chona calmly came out to meet him. He arrogantly demanded to be allowed to see the master, but received a firm refusal. The girl coldly ordered all matters to be laid out right on the stairs. Enraged by audacity, the guest swung and drew his sword. He roared that some girl dared to provoke him. The old man shouted and raised his weapon above her head. Chona did not even flinch. A sudden crash. Her eyes widened in shock. A moment before the fatal strike, an unknown warrior firmly blocked the old man's blade with his own sword. The scarred man shielded Chona with his body and dryly stated that no entry was allowed, while the attacker fiercely demanded explanations. The attacker turned crimson with rage. The defender's eyes flared red, and his weapon filled with bloody energy. He warned that the time for persuasion was over. The old man suddenly turned pale, broke out in a cold sweat, and begged to wait. He was already bursting with rage over the demotion, and now it seemed everyone around openly considered him a fool. His eyes flared with demonic red light, and a deadly aura enveloped his body as he roared that he would finish them all. The attendees were paralyzed by sticky horror. They realized on their own skin how dangerous this man was. Meanwhile, in another yard, the old steward hurried to flee, coughing dryly and citing urgent matters. As soon as he left, the messenger with a coat of arms on his forehead unconditionally ordered the girl to go with him to the 3rd heir. But with icy calm, she cut him off, saying she did not obey his orders. The warrior's face twisted with rage. Some ordinary servant dared to contradict him. The girl coldly reminded him of the rules of the main house, and advised him to save that arrogance for his master. The messenger ground his teeth in anger, and barked at her to know her place. Disdainfully throwing out that his lord did not tolerate things used by someone else, he sharply turned around and walked away. The scarred warrior grunted in dissatisfaction after the messenger. Her companion had just sighed over the number of troubles that day when another guest appeared before them, the secretary of the lake garden. Looking down on the girl with a glance, he called her insolent and ordered her to be immediately taken to his master. But she did not even flinch. Silently, she took out a sheet of paper, staring at the arrogant official with an absolutely impassive gaze. The girl coldly cut off, saying that the master does not accept any guests. The secretary asked distrustfully if the great heir really does not receive visitors. The mustached messenger faltered, explaining that he must personally deliver a letter from the second heir. The scarred guard intervened. Let him give the message to the maid and get lost. The old official measured the girl with a contemptuous look, ordering her to remember one thing well. He leaned in close and hissed that she would still remain forever in the hands of the second heir. The messenger headed for the exit, and the guard calmly remarked that the master actually did not forbid visits. The girl was confused because there really was no direct order, and the warrior added that he said this not out of respect for the great heir. He glanced over his shoulder. He just felt sorry for the girl, who got into trouble and reminded him of his own daughter. The warrior asked if she truly swore allegiance to the great heir, or was only seeking protection. After all, he could have driven away the messengers with a single word, but he did not. The guard said and walked away. Her eyes widened from the sudden realization. While the man dissolved into the shadows, the girl recalled all the kind people she had met after being sold to the Sword Clan. By the way, suddenly flashed through her mind. Her gaze became focused and heavy. For the first time, she soberly assessed her own loyalty. All her life, she had simply repaid exactly as much as she received. It turns out she treated the great heir exactly the same way. Her thoughts were abruptly cut off. Someone's hands extended a sealed white envelope. The man at the table didn't even look, and sharply threw it away. The message from the second heir instantly flared up in the golden brazier. She stared at the master in shock. He calmly flipped through the book and quietly said that he had heard everything perfectly. The girl tensed. The letter could reveal her whereabouts, and the master hadn't even opened it. She nervously lowered her gaze. The man indifferently cut in that for something truly important, one comes personally, and then unexpectedly asked why she hadn't read the envelope herself beforehand. Her eyes widened in shock. He lazily tore himself away from the pages and repeated his question right to her face. She clenched the dark cover in her hands until her knuckles turned white. Indignation boiled in her eyes. How dare the servant treat her like that at all? Instead, the young man smiled unusually calmly and suggested forgetting about it over a cup of tea. The amber drink filled the cup, and he nodded to allow the girl to join. She carefully brought the porcelain to her lips. After taking a sip, the girl relaxed a little, and aloud noted the pleasant aroma. Suddenly she froze. A strange question about the unread text surfaced in her memory, and an inner voice sharply ordered her to stop. The details came together like a puzzle. The eldest heir always touched the food only after she had tasted it first. A terrible suspicion struck the brain. A few drops broke off into the air. The girl shivered. They had been preparing together all this time, not out of care, but because he was panically afraid of poisoning and did not trust her. The bitter truth burned her heart. She remained for him just as much a potential threat as everyone else around. Barely breathing, she shockingly covered her mouth with her hand. Suddenly jumping up from her seat, the girl painfully threw at the master, who also turned out to be an uninvited guest in this house. The woman froze before him, nervously clutching the belt of her clothing. He calmly read the notes, listening to her belated apology. She admitted that on her own initiative, she had driven away all the guests from him. The girl depressedly lowered her eyes. All her ostentatious cleverness turned out to be just blind foolishness. All these years she had desperately survived, having no one nearby to whom she truly wanted to loyally serve. With a dull thud, she fell to her knees, begging to accept her absolute loyalty. The girl froze in a low bow, awaiting the verdict. He coldly measured her with his gaze. The young man asked directly, would she not retreat despite any terrible secrets and mortal danger? Her firm yes cut through the silence. Then he sharply asked what she knew about his father. At this question, the girl tensely became confused. She recounted the official rumors about the illness of the former clan leader, but the young man stunned her with the truth. His father had long been lying unconscious from poisoning. Power in the Sword Clan has long been held in the shadows by the elders, and that is why he had to fight for his own life alone since childhood. Her gaze froze. He coldly inquired how many assassination attempts, in her opinion, he had survived. The girl confusedly whispered that she could not even imagine it. The young man calmly explained, this is only a drop of the darkness that the Sword Clan from Loyan truly hides. He asked again if she still wished to serve him, and the girl, without hesitation, bowed her head before the master. He leaned back on his knee in a relaxed manner. With one motion, he handed her some letter and ordered her to read the last page. Her lips trembled as she read the lines. If she confessed, to be forced to toil like an ox, and if she tried to make a deal with the heir, her eyes widened with animal terror. The order was brief. Quietly eliminate. Tears of pain rolled down her cheeks. The chief secretary who delivered this death sentence to her was like a father to her. The young man calmly sipped tea, waiting for her to grasp the meaning of what she had read. Hiding her tear-streaked face in her palms, she sorrowfully confirmed that she understood the lesson. Gathering her thoughts, the girl admitted, "Such fanatical loyalty is pure madness. For how else to explain a person's readiness to give up even their own child for the sake of duty?" He closed his eyes with a slight smile. His gaze became serious. He asked if she was ready to prove her loyalty if he accepted her, since the decision always remained with the master. Her cheeks flushed with a blush. Placing her hand on her chest, the girl fervently swore to serve only him, her sole master and great heir. He smiled warmly, pleased with such a response. Under the night sky stood the Wangak Pavilion, the luxurious chambers of the great heir. Inside, the girl quietly told her interlocutor about the past, when her father managed the trade guild and the family lived in harmony. The memories took her back to a carefree childhood on a warm pier beside her father and sister. Back then, she still knew how to smile sincerely. But the idyll shattered completely, like broken glass. The guild faced difficulties, and the family fell into debt. The usurers initially lured them with meager interest rates. The girl's gaze sharpened. It turned out to be a trap that forced them to pay 10 times more, and even her talented sister could not outplay the situation. The boy listened silently, holding a cup of tea, while she bitterly recalled how both girls were sold into foreign families because of the debts. He asked again if such a young girl could really manage the business, to which he received a firm answer. The sister had always been an outstanding strategist. Behind the narrator, the formidable shadow of a one-eyed woman emerged. Now she had settled in Nayani and become a famous informant. From the word informant, the boy's eyes sharply narrowed. A tense pause hung in the air. A gloomy shadow covered the girl's face as she recalled the recent letter. Her sister had finally found the culprit of all their misfortunes. Unrestrained by hatred, she hissed that she would never forget that fat bastard named Kim Jill. Over tea, he asked if her sister was the informant, because the name Kim Jill clearly sounded like a made-up nickname. The girl silently stood nearby, meekly lowering her gaze. Taking another sip, he calmly suggested visiting her tomorrow. The maid shuddered, and sincere joy flashed in her eyes. He allowed her to spend a whole half-day with her loved one. The boy only smiled warmly in response. A sunny morning came. The wind gently swayed the leaves. "Master, I am ready," her timid voice sounded. She stepped into the yard, shyly blushing in her clean but simple everyday attire. He cast a scrutinizing glance at her and cut off. For the companion of the great heir of the sword clan from Luoyang, such clothing was clearly insufficient. Turning around, he called the gatekeeper across the entire yard. A dissatisfied shuffling of footsteps was heard, which he immediately cut off with a sharp order to shut up. With a careless wave of his hand, he shocked the subordinate, ordering him to immediately bring the best women's dress from the inner courtyard. The guard with a scar fiercely gritted his teeth. He had just been threatened with demotion to garbage collector if he did not promptly fulfill the task. The young man aggressively loomed over him, ignoring the pitiful whimper. Hearing that he was already being labeled a garbage collector, the gatekeeper screamed and literally vanished into thin air. The air even blinked at such a teleportation technique. Meanwhile, the guard rushed at full speed, mentally cursing the lazy rich kid and consoling himself with the thought of a quick job change. A moment passed. He returned empty-handed. Breathing heavily, the man irritably stated that they would not give the items because the master himself had to know the reason. The young man frowned. The maid timidly reminded that time was running out, and the boy was suddenly struck with realization. "I completely forgot," he said calmly, rolling up his sleeve. A swing, and with a dull thud, he stamped the massive golden seal right on the subordinate's forehead. While the gatekeeper stared in shock at the inscription, "The Greatest Sword," the heir casually ordered to show it in the inner courtyard. And so that he wouldn't waste time on unnecessary words, the young man sent him on a new flight with a powerful kick. The maid was stunned. He calmly confirmed her suspicion. This was the genuine seal of the clan leader. The young man calmly twisted a massive gold ingot in his hands. The girl nearly went gray from shock, not understanding why he took such a thing while her father was in such a state. But he only smiled confidently. Who else but the great heir should hold the relic? It was the famous golden seal of the sword clan from Luoyang, an ancient and priceless gift from the emperor himself, a symbol of absolute power, which he was about to use right now to buy ordinary clothes for a servant. The young man carelessly admitted that he had previously used the relic to buy books and brushes, since otherwise the local dealers refused to cooperate properly. At such a confession, the servant's eye twitched nervously, and she hurriedly ushered him out the door. And outside, a large delegation was already waiting for him, led by the secretary of the inner court, Wu Hua-yon. The woman respectfully bowed and reported on the delivery of the ordered goods. The heir crossed his arms over his chest, mentally noting, if they had cooperated from the very beginning, everything would have been much easier. Under his cold gaze, Wu Hua-yon nervously wiped sweat and hurried to get away. The delegation left a whole pile of goods in the middle of the courtyard. Chests, barrels, and rolls of the finest silk, waiting to be unpacked. She stood in a new light outfit, sharply standing out among the crowd in identical robes. Awkwardly lowering her eyes, the girl muttered that these things were not at all befitting her rank. But the young man immediately cut off her doubts. He calmly warned that from now on she would have to get used to such clothing. Her fingers nervously gathered the fabric of the sleeves. Gathering her thoughts, she obediently agreed. A cloudless sky stretched over the city. Before them towered Nyan, the ancient political and cultural heart of the continent. The huge trading hub on the Huanghe River buzzed like a beehive, letting millions of people pass through its streets. In the noisy crowd, some passerby sharply tugged his companion by the shoulder. The man with a scar opened his mouth, staring mesmerized at the beauty walking towards them. But the partner hissed fearfully to immediately hide the finger. After all, a warrior from the mighty Sword of Loyan clan was walking beside her. The young man passed by them indifferently, not even glancing at the frozen onlookers. The scarred soldier grimaced discontentedly. He was simply driven mad that a devoted veteran was turned into a messenger and nanny. So he grumbled irritably about some personal matters and hurried away. The scarred guard asked in shock, could it be that the young master really intends to leave without him? He only nodded carelessly, ordering to watch the maid well. The warrior abruptly turned around. The boy's trail had already gone cold. Clenching his fists, he grimly warned the girl that she would have to stay alone. The maid calmly smiled, asking him not to worry and to follow the master. She did not doubt her lord's strength at all, while the guard mentally cursed his inhuman speed. Pushing off the stone slabs, the warrior rushed after the great heir. One swift jerk, and he flew onto the mansion's roof. From the height, the man looked around the streets in confusion. The youth had vanished right under his nose, leaving no trace. The warrior clenched his teeth tensely, covered in cold sweat from the single question, who really is this boy? The youth with long dark hair froze before the tall wooden gates. With a dull creak, the massive leaves opened slightly. He confidently stepped onto the stone tile and reported that they had arrived. The beaten, bearded man awkwardly invited the guests to his modest home. But as soon as they entered the yard, the host froze in shock. His bloodied face was distorted by horror. He realized that the Black Bone Gang had also visited here. Overcome with panic, he desperately called his wife into the darkness. The man sprang up and rushed forward at full speed, and suddenly braked. His whole and unharmed wife ran out to meet him with 2 children. The exhausted bearded man burst into tears and tightly gathered his family in an embrace. The family wept in each other's arms, while the young man silently watched from the side. Suddenly the woman noticed the guest behind his back. She instantly fell to her knees before him, begging not to kill the man and swearing to repay all debts. The woman, in despair, rushed to the beaten man, tearfully begging the stranger for mercy. She pleaded to spare him at least this time. But the bloodied man suddenly stopped his wife, explaining that this young man was actually his rescuer. The woman froze in surprise. The next moment she bowed low to the young man, thanking him warmly. He just silently looked at the family. Recovering, the saved man awkwardly invited the guest to enter their poor home for a cup of tea. The young man calmly agreed. The bearded man sighed with relief, and the young man unflinchingly followed him. Already in the room, the host carefully poured simple tea for the rescuer, embarrassed by such a poor treat. The young man took a sip and noted the pleasant aroma of the drink. When the man asked how to repay him for the rescue, the guest refused a reward and directly asked about the bandits who had caused the riot. The host sighed heavily and told that the local accomplices had made a deal with the cruel gang Blackbone and its ruthless leader. The bandits were everywhere money smelled, from usury to gambling houses. The conversation in the room continued. The man opposite admitted that the gambling house was an old trap of the usurers. The law strictly limited the interest rates, so the bandits forced the debtors to play in order to artificially inflate their debt. The young man grew gloomy. He and his father had once approved this law. Sipping tea, he asked if the family knew anything else about the local leaders. The host helplessly shrugged. Such secrets were inaccessible to ordinary people. The young man silently closed his eyes. Everything fell into place. He stood up, thanked for the tea, and headed to the door. The host jumped up embarrassed, begging the guest to give his name for future reward. He calmly replied that it was unnecessary, but the couple called after him. Together with his little son, they stood resolutely in a line, refusing to ungratefully say goodbye to their savior. A cold, piercing gaze. On the floor among dozens of broken fragments, a single intact mask mystically glowed. The young man slowly moved towards it. He picked up the smooth wood and decided to take it to finally put an end to everything. The master turned pale upon recognizing the object. The man quietly confessed that he was not the one who actually created it. He carefully touched the white surface. The mask was completely unfinished. No eye sockets or nostrils. Only narrow, roughly cut slits. It turned out to be the deathbed creation of his father, who went mad in old age and carved it until his last breath. The master added that the object was cursed, and he was just about to destroy it. The young man thoughtfully looked at the mask and asked why the old man chose it for his finale. The master shrugged. How could one understand what was going on in a madman's head? His lips stretched into a predatory smile. He directly asked what exactly happened in that moment of madness. The master stared at the guest in shock. The sudden question cut through the silence. How did he know that? The man sighed and remembered his older, much more talented brother. Once, he was unjustly accused and thrown behind bars. Their father, a renowned master, in despair, fell at the feet of the influential Inspector Nyan. The official demanded such a bribe that the family had to go into debt to the ruthless Blackbone gang. They paid the money, but instead of a free young man, they received back only his cold corpse. The father and younger son wept bitterly over the dead body. Later, the worst was revealed. The execution was carried out by the very inspector to whom they had paid. The man's face twisted from an old grievance, but behind this betrayal lay an even dirtier dispute among the nobles over jewels. A deafening pause. It turned out that one of the high officials simply used the father's masterpiece as a stake in a game. The listener frowned, dryly demanding to continue this gloomy confession. The defeated man went mad. The man's face twisted with rage, veins bulging on his temples. Unable to reach the father directly, the enemy slandered the elder brother, causing the old man to go to the magistrate daily with protests. Instead, the guards simply beat him with their feet on the stones, shouting for him to be silent. The inspector fabricated a case, and so that the artist could never create again, both his hands were broken with a club. The mutilated old man was dragged home on someone's back, and since then, he has locked himself in the workshop forever. The son desperately pounded his fists on the door, but saw his father only after his death. The young man in white calmly asked if he still did not realize the true meaning of this mask. The man fell heavily to his knees and pressed his forehead to the boards, begging to explain the father's deathbed work. It was obvious why the mask turned out so clumsy. The young man tightly squeezed its rough, uneven edges. Darkness swallowed everything. The old master simply went mad. With disheveled hair and a mad look, he had long stopped eating, drooling in complete delirium. Having lost his hands, the master fiercely carved the mask with his toes, peeling the skin to bloody calluses. Only fierce hatred and pain kept him from inevitable death. He bit into the wood with his teeth, splattering blood in a fit of wild despair. As soon as the work was completed, the creator died, releasing a monster into the world. Before his eyes flashed the image of a once happy family, and in a moment, the father's body was pierced by bloody spikes, while the mother and children helplessly sobbed below. The vision shattered into red shards. From the darkness emerged a young man in white. Someone's soul, filled with resentment, refused to disappear and brought him here. Wrapped in a heavy purple aura, he froze above the bodies, clutching the very same mask. At his feet lay a motionless woman. Could it be that this family found peace only after death? His gaze slid over the smooth wood, and the young man finally understood the dead creator's intent. The old man not only failed to carve out the eye sockets, he consciously refused to do so. Fingers slowly caught the edge of the white mask, from beneath which a chilling laughter grew. With one jerk, he tore it off, revealing a snarling face that exploded with a fierce purple aura. He croaked that it was simply unbearable to look at this world with open eyes. The sun barely pierced the gloomy stone alleys of Nyan. The needle methodically drove ink into the skin, drawing a new skull, a mark for another life taken. The old tattoo artist finished the drawing on the shoulder of the huge man with blindfolded eyes, and calmly asked if he was satisfied with the work. The master squinted slyly, preparing to continue, but the giant suddenly snarled and sharply ordered him to step aside immediately. The wooden ceiling crashed into pieces with a roar. Two killers in black fell from above straight into the room. The blade of the sword flashed down onto the head of the motionless giant, but he only smiled fiercely. He was expecting this attack. The mercenary put all his speed into the deadly strike. From under the victim's bandage suddenly flashed a terrifying red light, and the fist clenched for a counterattack. A devastating hook struck the attacker's face directly, knocking the wind out of him. The killer helplessly flew backward, and the giant was already rising to meet him, ready to break bones. A sudden flash, and the air was torn apart by a deafening roar. Weapons clashed at close range, sparking a bundle of crimson sparks. The giant mercilessly drove the killer into the floor, shattering the wooden boards completely. Without stopping, he spun and delivered a devastating overhead strike, leaving a bloody trail of energy behind him. A heavy boot slammed down on the floor with a crash. The giant's eyes flared with demonic light as another enemy lunged at him from above. In vain, the mighty fist met the attacker mid-flight. The dust settled, revealing the wrecked room with the bodies of dead mercenaries. Grinning ominously, the giant explained that the thirst for killing can be hidden, but the sharpness of the blade never can. And this is what distinguishes masters from miserable worms. He said to his master with satisfaction that it was time to add 4 new skulls to his body. Bathed in a crimson aura, the warrior loomed over the frightened old man. A familiar voice was heard from the side. His brother, easily holding a broken beam with one hand, praised the relative for his work. With scars and blood on his face, he admitted that he also managed to have some fun, and suddenly remembered strange rumors from the guys downstairs. The smile vanished instantly, and his gaze became tense and sharp like a blade. The beaten, bloodied man crawled on the floor, and choking, reminded about the young man whose plaque they had taken away. According to rumors, his shop was quietly operating again. It turned out that the subordinates had accidentally killed the entire family of the owner, and now some pale scientist was sitting in his place. The dark-haired young man sat calmly at the table, with his back to the door. The leader's face twisted with rage. Someone dared to open the establishment he had personally confiscated. The giant, covered in skull tattoos, trudged heavily forward, right over the debris. A cloudless blue sky hung over the city. 2 burly mercenaries confidently walked down the wide street. Heavy boots froze on the threshold when the guest asked if this was the very scientist. The second snorted that he was seeing the boy for the first time, and that he was completely green. Giants loomed over the table, disdainfully examining the young brat. The knife blade rhythmically shaved shavings from the wooden statuette. The young man calmly suggested asking directly. A heavy boot stepped inside the room. The stranger's face stretched into a predatory smile. He mockingly inquired where the real owner of the masks had gone. An icy gaze pierced from beneath the faceless mask. The enemy involuntarily shuddered. The big guy mentally cursed himself for the sudden fear of this creepy thing. The tattooed giant loomed over the young man and barked, demanding an answer from the smaller one. The mask barely moved. Pale fingers calmly rested on the head of the wooden statuette. A quiet voice sounded from the shadows, faltering on the very first word. The stranger slid the mask aside, flashing a demonic eye and a predatory smile, and asked if they knew the true face of Avalokiteshvara. The bandits just stupidly glanced at each other, not understanding this religious delusion. The young man turned away with the statuette in his hand, sighing that there was no point in talking to them about Buddha's teachings. He straightened up and coldly decided that it would be easier to simply finish off the attacker. The enemy's faces twisted with rage, as they did not consider this insolent fellow worthy of even a single blow. A mountain of muscles moved forward heavily, pounding steps into the floor with a rumble. The tattooed leader looked around the mask shop in confusion. His men were supposed to smash this place to pieces. They had taken all the valuables from here, so the perfectly intact display cases now seemed like someone's sick sorcery. His companion was silently gloomy. The leader irritably told the owner that he himself had no idea where the boy had gone. Meanwhile, his long-haired partner pushed open the door to the next room. From the darkness suddenly came a terrifying laugh. The warrior recoiled. Dozens of ghostly purple hands reached out to him from beneath the floor. His eyes widened with horror. From the darkness, a massive, shadowy paw flashed out. It clamped tightly around the long-haired man's throat. He gasped hoarsely, desperately digging his nails into the dead grip. Seeing this from the corridor, the woman frantically called her brother. The leader reacted instantly, and with a heavy roar rushed to help. Her face was distorted by a scream. "What the hell?" the giant roared, flying backward from the heavy blow. His boot screeched as it tore into the ground. The giant screamed wildly, flipping through the air. A pale clawed hand sank into the soil with a crunch, leaving deep furrows. The giant covered his face with his hand in panic and screamed desperately, pitifully begging for rescue. His deathly scream drowned in complete darkness. From the black haze emerged predatory crimson eyes, and jaws stretched into eerie smiles. The last violet sparks melted away in the air. The room with theatrical masks was engulfed by a sinister aura under the sounds of mad laughter. One of the painted faces seemed to come alive, grinning out of the darkness. Golden sunlight softly pierced through the leaves. In the middle of the quiet grove, a man in white clothes sat on a stone bench, calmly carving something. The silence was broken only by the measured rustle of the blade on the wood. The chisel slowly shaved a shaving from the wood. He was carefully carving a mask, realizing that simple copying of the form was not enough. He pondered what the face of that Buddha he knew looked like. He exhaled with a relieved smile that everything was ready, and relaxedly sat down under the tree in the rays of the setting sun. The wooden statuette of the deity fell with a dull thud into its place. He froze before the fresh burial mound, beside which now stood a staff carved with masks, and quietly wished the fallen to rest in peace. A heavy silence reigned near the lonely grave. Suddenly the air trembled with a violet aura. He remembered the enemies from the Blackbone Gang and Kim Ju, mentally allowing them to continue mocking and ridiculing. His face was distorted by cold, predatory rage. After all, these pitiful jeers would be their last resistance in life. The Hyunwol Pavilion towered under the bright sky. Inside, the one-eyed informant, Si declared from the threshold that the Sword Clan from Luoyang was tearing apart political chaos. She stated the fact: the power of the heirs was growing, while the influence of the old hermit leader had long been reduced to zero. Even dirty rumors about his poisoning began to spread again. Her interlocutor sipped tea leisurely and called it nonsense, acerbically adding that the great heir still did not trust Si herself. She clearly saw this cheap provocation. The woman closed her eyes and dryly cut off, saying she was not going to reveal the clan's secrets. A cup with a clink was set down on the table. Si sharply reminded that the matter was not about trust now. The interlocutor agreed and herself voiced the rumors. Supposedly, the chaos in the clan arose purely because of the great heir's fault. A vein twitched on her forehead from barely restrained rage. She flatly refused to blame the lord who had not yet gained full power. Si grinned fiercely and harshly rebuked her, hitting right at the heart. The crisis continues precisely because the throne is still empty. The opponent froze in shock. Seizing the initiative, Si admitted that she was greatly surprised by the woman's yesterday transition under the great heir's wing. But she only gloomily raised her eyes, acknowledging that enemy spies work swiftly, and a dossier on her had already been compiled. The woman with the long pipe lazily exhaled smoke, saying that she had deciphered the mistress's plan regarding the great heir. The one-eyed informant was puzzled by one thing. Why did she follow a person who doesn't even know how to hold a sword? The interlocutor sharply cut her off, forbidding such talk, and scorched the guest with a fierce look. She calmly parried that she was well aware of the young man's hidden power. However, the former clan head went into seclusion 10 years ago. During this time, his opponents have grown enormous power. The hostess silently listened, frozen with a cup in her hands. The one-eyed woman turned away and added that now they can only watch the boy's further actions. Suddenly, something suspicious caught their attention. The woman's eyes widened in shock from the loud sound. She sharply turned toward the entrance. The massive doors shattered with a deafening crash. A crowd of thugs burst into the room with a harsh order, immediately seized the head of the Hyunwol Pavilion. The girl with purple hair turned pale. The mere mention of the Blackbone Gang made her exchange a terrified glance with her one-eyed companion. An attack on their neutral guild in broad daylight seemed pure suicide. But the bold voice abruptly interrupted the thoughts. A massive bald thug rushed at the head of the pavilion. The one-eyed woman didn't even have time to blink when a stranger's hand lunged straight at her face. The attacker's fingers dug into her head with a dead grip amid her sister's desperate scream. Meanwhile, at the noisy market in Nyan, completely different events were unfolding. Someone was panicking over the unexpectedly found heir. The warrior with a scar across his entire face angrily snarled at such accusations. But upon meeting the icy gaze of the long-haired youth, he instantly faltered and began to make excuses. The youth was absolutely indifferent. He shifted his gaze to the skewer with meat. While he calmly chewed, the guard helplessly collapsed to the ground, lamenting about the maid wandering the city alone. The long-haired one only gave a crooked smile at the warning about danger. He continued to quietly finish his portion, which finally defeated the confused warrior. A cunning, self-confident smile spread across the heir's face. Someone's hand sharply grabbed a smoking pipe from the table, throwing in passing that they were borrowing it from their sister. The aristocrat abruptly swung the long metal pipe. The blow struck directly into the tattooed bandit's throat. He wheezed, spitting blood. A bruise instantly appeared on the broken jaw. The big guy fell onto the boards like a sack, raising a cloud of dust. The rest of the bandits froze in cold sweat. The aristocrat skillfully twirled the weapon without taking her eyes off the new enemies emerging from the shadows. Their scarred leader snarled fiercely, as if waving a stick without martial arts skills is a futile endeavor. The one-eyed woman listened tensely to his taunts about how every ordinary person has their limit. The mercenaries slowly encircled the aristocrat tightly. She only quietly asked the one-eyed woman how much longer they would have to hold the defense. Fingers clenched the pipe until it cracked. In response, it was said that there was at most 15 minutes left. During this time, the prepared traps were supposed to activate, so the women stood shoulder to shoulder, accepting the final fight from the leader whose patience had already run out. The big guy with a crooked smile confidently moved toward the girl. "You brought trouble on yourself," one of them shouted, and the trio rushed forward. The air was torn by a heavy swing of a fist. In her unflinching eyes, the attack flying straight at the target was clearly reflected. She felt everything: the opponent's broken breath, the contraction of his muscles, a barely noticeable tilt of the head, and the fist whistled past. An instant counterattack. She sharply struck the tattooed bandit with the hilt under the jaw. The big guy flew back with a dull groan, and the girl smoothly shifted into a new fighting stance. Another one shouted madly that this was no ordinary girl, and she was not to be pitied, rushing into close combat. Another lightning-fast lunge finally knocked the tattooed man off his feet. He fell heavily to the floor, and she did not even look back. The woman with the eye patch froze in shock. She could not believe it. A stranger without any combat skills easily scattered the trained elite of the Blackbone gang. A man with skull tattoos on his shoulder drew a blade, twisted with rage. He roared that only blood would bring her to her senses, and with a swing lowered the sword. The attacker leapt at her, amid the desperate cry of the companion, "Chona, be careful." But in the girl's golden eyes, not a drop of fear flickered. She met the enemy cold-bloodedly. A lightning flash and a sharp strike. Heavy blows fell right in the faces of the attackers, scattering splashes of blood. A quick turn. A wooden stick with a dull thud struck directly into the attacker. The big guy helplessly flipped in the air and crashed on his back at her feet. Breathing heavily, Chona lowered her weapon. The stunned friend asked about the secret techniques of the Sword Clan, but in response, heard only the mundane confession that she simply watched their training. The one-eyed companion blinked confusedly, trying to make sense of this absurd confession. Around them, the entire floor of the hall was completely covered with dozens of beaten fighters. Suddenly, someone's heavy footsteps broke the silence. A stranger in luxurious boots appeared at the threshold, demanding explanations. Both girls sharply turned around, cautiously staring at the uninvited guest. The blonde in the red dress smiled predatory, and with feigned pity said that she had fed and raised these scoundrels in vain. Crossing her arms, she arrogantly added that they did not know how to receive guests here at all. The blonde in the red dress and her guards burst into the hall, contemptuously driving out all the small fry. The beaten men with tattoos on the floor froze in fear, not understanding what was happening. At the head of the room, a brunette with an eye patch sat impassively, coldly reminding that such actions would have to be paid for. The guests snorted discontentedly that they were met without respect and were not even offered tea. The hostess cut in that they were no guests at all, to which the blonde mockingly said, as if she had completely lost her mind. She confidently added that if she had come as an enemy, the brunette would already be dead. Her subordinate suddenly swung his hand with sharp claws abruptly. A lightning strike tore through the air. The blades whistled past, right in front of the mistress's face. Blood appeared on her cheek, but she remained seated with an icy gaze. The blonde sincerely admired such composure and sighed that her fighters lacked similar courage. She slowly stepped forward, complaining that recently her people have been constantly attacked. The brunette calmly parried that this was the usual payback for their aggressive expansion. Then the guest leaned over the table and directly stated that she suspected her of organizing the attacks. The figure in black asked gloomily if she really attacked just because of that. The blonde in red smiled confidently. She had timed the perfect moment when the head protection of the Hyunwall pavilion cracked. Her gaze became predatory. From now on, she has a reliable source and does not intend to dance to the tune of worthless geniuses. The women opposite tensed, guessing who was behind her, but she dismissed their assumptions. Slender fingers smoothly slid under the fur collar. A copper token of the Sword Clan, the most powerful organization of the Central Plain, fell into the light. The dark-haired assistant paled from shock. Her companion, in a white kimono, barely trembled. The blonde woman arrogantly clenched the artifact, checking if they recognized this symbol. The assistant quickly composed herself and coldly cut off, saying it did not matter. The blonde smiled triumphantly. Now they understood why she raised this fuss without any fear of consequences. Suddenly, a young man in white clothes appeared in the doorway, and with a slight smile asked to look at the token. All three women instantly froze in surprise. The young man in white clothes smiled relaxedly. He had arrived just in time. Someone nearby only sighed wearily at this pomposity. It turned out that the scarred warrior was barely catching his breath. Instead of a normal path, they had climbed the rocks solely for a dramatic entrance. The young man squinted carefreely, completely ignoring the quiet anger of his companion. He gestured to the blonde and boldly ordered her to show the thing she had just been flaunting. The girl scrutinized through the golden badge and sharply asked who he was in general. Behind her back, burly fighters instantly tensed. The scarred man irritably pointed to their uniform, expecting them to immediately recognize the Sword Clan guard. The big guy with the rosary mockingly asked if they thought they had scared anyone with that. The warrior clenched his teeth with a crunch and crossed his arms over his chest. After all, despite the simple clothes, this smiling young man was actually an outstanding master. The bald bandit only burst into a contemptuous laugh in response and ordered his men to deal with the uninvited guests. The young man calmly closed his eyes and exhaled impassively. At that very moment, a cold and obedient confirmation of the order sounded. The man with terrifyingly burning eyes cracked his knuckles, a heavy step forward. The fighters around instantly broke out in cold sweat, oppressed by his furious aura. The stranger drew a huge sword and coldly counted 2 steps. The guards convulsively reached for their weapons when he threw a short 3 steps, a lightning-fast lunge. The blonde barely managed to blink in surprise. The warrior passed by her like a blurred shadow, stirring the air with a sharp movement, the dull thud of boots on the floor. He was already kneeling before the dark-haired young man and respectfully extended a token to him, calling him the Great Heir. The woman in red looked shocked at her trembling fingers, finally realizing that a true master had just rushed past her. The young man calmly took the item in his hands to verify its authenticity. He explained that this copper token is a symbol of absolute gratitude from the Sword Clan, an unbreakable promise to repay kindness anytime and anywhere. If the benefactor with this artifact finds himself in trouble, the entire clan will come to help without hesitation and fight to the death for him. One-eyed woman dryly remarked that once this token was a symbol of reckless trust. The young man carelessly threw a coin to his interlocutor, cutting off by saying that now it is only a business guarantee of safety from the blades of his family. The blonde in the red dress skillfully caught the token. He calmly explained, if this token is ignored, the entire long-standing reputation of the Sword Clan will simply collapse. The woman smiled slyly, recognizing in him the infamous heir without talent for weapons, to which he in a steady voice named his name, Yeon So-hyun. His icy gaze did not intimidate Kim Ju at all. She only mockingly snorted about her feigned fear. Laughing, the blonde asked what had brought the slacker here, who for years had only wasted his potential. She leisurely tossed a strand of hair aside. Her mockery did not cease. Apparently the young man was tired of sitting under lock and key in Loyan, and he decided to disgrace the clan's name on the streets. The room filled with her self-satisfied laughter. A loud bang on the table sharply interrupted the fun. A stern order to watch one's tongue was heard. The one-eyed leader grimly clenched a long pipe, instantly tightening the atmosphere in the hall. She harshly reminded that no matter what, this young man belongs to the great Sword Clan. But the blonde only glanced arrogantly over her shoulder, interrupting the head of the Hyunwol Pavilion with a question whether this inexperienced boy even resembled a formidable warrior. The blonde in red arrogantly raised her cup, boasting to her companion about influential connections with the true heir of the Sword Clan. Her gaze narrowed predatory. Noticing 2 visitors at the threshold, she instantly recognized the very problem girl she had heard about from her lord. The woman mockingly poked her with a finger. The dark-haired guest silently listened as the hostess delighted in this sudden coincidence. A mocking smile twisted the blonde's lips. She was questioning why the other had rejected such a favorable chance. She could not understand why one would serve a miserable slacker instead of becoming someone's concubine. The dark-haired woman flared up and sharply cut in that such a woman must not even mention the name of her noble lord. Her eyes burned with undisguised fury. The blonde snorted contemptuously, immediately reminding how this noble lord had renounced responsibility and become a laughingstock for his own clan. However, she bitterly admitted that even such an outcast stood above her, an ordinary rootless street girl. The dark-haired girl blushed and lowered her gaze, for the offender had struck at the most painful spot. Her lord was the heir of the Sword Clan, which did not possess a sword. The whole province buzzed about this disgrace. While the father on his deathbed held the family with his last strength, the son simply hid in the shadows. Coward, weakling, and scoundrel. These words hung in the air when the blonde boldly demanded an answer from her about the truth. The blonde looked coldly from top to bottom, and allowed her to have the last word. The servant bitterly thought how sad it was that her master was not at all as people said. But now any words would be in vain. For the first time, she felt so helpless because of her own powerlessness, and emotions simply overwhelmed her. Enough. A man's hand sharply lay on the servant's shoulder, cutting off the argument. The heir authoritatively pulled the embarrassed girl to himself and calmly warned, one more step, and he would get angry, because no one had the right to touch his personal servant. The blonde in red regretfully noted that an unfortunate obstacle had interfered. She was going to teach the head of the Hyunwol Pavilion a good lesson today. A predatory smile played on the guest's lips. She promised that next time this worthless boy would save no one. The one-eyed warrior silently observed the actions of her master. The warrior in black silently scanned the guest with her gaze, not uttering a single word. The blonde in red waved her hand in farewell and headed to the exit along with her massive retinue. As soon as the door closed, the servant was seized by trembling, and she barely audibly called for the master. At that very moment, strength finally left the girl, and she faintly collapsed into the warrior's arms. The warrior caught the unconscious girl and desperately tried to bring Chona to consciousness. Sweat rolled down her pale face. The shock she experienced was too strong. Two men froze by the bed of the unconscious girl. The warrior in black clenched the sheet until it cracked, boiling with rage at those who dared to desecrate the name of the Sword Clan. His massive fist trembled slightly from tension. Gritting his teeth, he growled that he would gladly tear the insolent one to pieces, and immediately apologized for his audacity. But the heir calmly replied, "The role is fulfilled." There was not a drop of fear in the young man's blue eyes. He coldly ordered the warrior to leave, because otherwise the enemies would consider them accomplices. The guard desperately blurted out that he must protect him. The heir looked down on him, sharply cutting off that it was not worth dying for someone to whom he had not sworn allegiance with his sword. The warrior shamefully bowed his head. The heir raised his hand with an authoritative gesture, cutting off any excuses. The young man's tone left no choice. It was a direct order to complete the mission and return. Nodding dully, the guard turned around, his face twisted with anger at himself. Even having achieved mastery, he had never felt so miserable. The warrior slowly moved down the corridor, and a moment later, someone's voice from behind the door decisively announced their visit to the great heir. The woman with an eye patch anxiously asked if everything was all right with Chona, to which the long-haired young man by the bed calmly replied that she was just sleeping. He looked around irritably. The guest squinted and asked why then he had checked the girl's pulse for so long. The young man's gaze grew cold, and he sharply changed the subject to the report on the Blackbone gang. The woman clenched the folder with documents and demanded to first hear the truth about her sister. After enduring a pause, he gloomily stated that he had found a serious illness in Chona, which greatly frightened the interlocutor. She shuddered from shock, and the young man only calmly shrugged his shoulders. He nodded at the sleeping girl, and calmly reminded his own words about ordinary fatigue. Snatching the papers from the angry woman's hands, he authoritatively added that overwork kills even the young. Looking at the peaceful face of the sick girl, he asked about the purpose of the investigation regarding the Blackbone gang. Quickly scanning the report with his eyes, the young man realized that the guest was preparing something extremely dangerous against them. He raised his eyes and directly asked how this related to the great heir. To his icy order to drop this case, the woman stubbornly retorted that she was not going to obey. But the young man knew perfectly well about her real influence and connections with the Sword Clan. He sternly reproached, being a professional and having such information, she had no right all this time to simply stand aside and watch. The woman with the bandage irritably clenched the object in her hand and harshly suggested to the interlocutor to go outside to give the patient peace. Above the quiet night roofs hung a full moon. In the middle of the spacious courtyard, a man suddenly asked her which trading and fighting clan was the most outstanding in the world. Without hesitation, she answered that it was, of course, the Sword Clan. She trembled with indignation. How could such a magnificent clan have given their token to the scoundrels from the Blackbone gang, while ordinary people were dying of hunger? She threw bitter truth in his face. While the bandits were sucking the blood from the people, The main clan simply stood aside. The man's face was drowned in shadows, and he gloomily objected. He finished for her. He was just using them. And the woman flared up with rage, shouting why he had been silent all this time if he knew everything. Her cloak flashed from a sharp movement. She passionately declared that all those harsh words Kim Ju said about him were absolutely true. Squinting fiercely, she accused her interlocutor of merely hiding behind solitude, while actually carefreely enjoying life. The woman sharply turned around and walked away, throwing back at him not to dare tell her what to do while she risked her life for change. "Don't touch Kim Ju anymore," came coldly to her back. She froze halfway, hearing the beginning of an unexpected story about two sisters who lived long ago. Caught off guard, the woman abruptly turned back. The young man was walking through the courtyard, telling a tragic story about the righteous elder sister. She gave up everything for revenge for the destroyed village, but suffered a devastating defeat. Her comrades fell, and the talented younger sister completely lost her mind from grief. Consumed by rage, she attacked those who pushed her own blood to death. However, the forces were unequal. The wounds exhausted the girl, and eventually, she was mercilessly cornered and killed. This story was a tale of the past, and at the same time, a prophecy of the future. Only a bloody trail remained from the sisters. The warrior woman asked confusedly what he meant, listening as the names and noble aspirations of the fallen faded into oblivion. The young man raised his gaze. Even in local legends, these women forever remained miserable rebels and enemies of the warrior world. The crowd only cursed their memory. The warrior woman admitted that she did not understand the words of the great heir, and then he explained directly, "Good people die too easily, and evil ones win too naturally." He turned away and struck with a question. Was she going to carry her struggle to the end if it would bring countless sacrifices? Even if absolutely innocent blood would be shed because of her. The fabric of his cloak flickered in the air, and in the girl's mind pulsed only one panicked thought. This simply cannot be. Her eye widened in shock. He saw right through her. The man stood in a whirlwind of dark aura, proclaiming that changing history requires a year of blood. He added that the righteous always sacrifice only themselves, taking on disgrace for the sake of saving the innocent. With a quiet click, he pulled a white mask over his face, bitterly admitting that all these deaths changed nothing. The woman with the eye patch froze in horror. The space was instantly engulfed by black smoke. Roaring purple energy burst outward. The man confessed that his childhood dream of changing the world turned out to be a fake. He slowly moved forward, recalling years of futile attempts to find solace in poverty and the study of the Tao. With a sharp wave of his hand, he raised a wave of power, for noble birth had never allowed him to hide from reality. The man hung in the epicenter of black flame, regretting that he could not cast aside desire and become free like the wind. Thick darkness. From beneath the slits of the mask, eyes gleamed fiercely. He accepted defeat before his own innate fate. But the future of this woman and her sister was not yet decided. She helplessly froze under the crushing pressure of his aura, listening to the promise to relentlessly watch over them. The dark silhouette finally dissolved into the gloom, to someday find out if their paths would cross again. A thick purple aura enveloped the silhouette, as he grimly warned that his path was a bloody hell of demons, where it was better for them never to cross. At that very moment, a gigantic, ghostly shadow of a demon with burning eyes rose above him with a terrifying roar. The woman with the eye patch shuddered and swallowed hard, confusedly trying to comprehend what she had seen. She convulsively clutched the clothing on her chest. "Great heir, who the hell are you?" In the shadow of the luxurious Loyan, gloomy slums were hidden. This place teemed with scum without a drop of humanity, who quickly became perfect meat for the Black Bone gang. One of these thugs sat relaxed near the local branch, dreaming of a promotion and his own henchmen. He grinned contentedly, flashing the skull tattoo on his shoulder. At that very moment, he was briefly called out from the darkness. The guard blinked in surprise. A stranger in a mask, wrapped in a purple aura, appeared before him and directly asked if this was the Black Bone base. The bandit glanced disdainfully at the guest and advised the weakling to get out while he was still whole. The big guy stood up to his full height, looming over the young man, but the latter calmly replied that he did not intend to join them. The stranger's gaze through the slits of the mask was icy. The bald man confidently snorted and proposed a deal. "Withstand 2 of my blows, and you will get a recommendation." He clenched his heavy fist in anticipation of amusement. A flame of dark energy burst from the stranger's eye, as he irritably called the big guy a slow-witted fool. The enraged guard cursed and with a swing brought down a heavy fist on the insolent one. The dark silhouette rushed forward, leaving behind only a purple trail. He stretched out his hand, concentrating terrifying magic in his fingers. The big guy swung his Pudov fist, but the guest in the mask easily slipped under the arm, throwing that he behaves politely only because of his status as a doorman. At that very moment, he grabbed the bald man's face with a death grip and whispered that he came to devour them all. From under his fingers, thick darkness flowed directly into the enemy's body. The big guy was harshly slammed into the ground. The stranger theatrically raised his hand, announcing the beginning of the great feast. Shrouded in shadows, the guard helplessly flailed in the air, panicking and demanding explanations. A purple sphere condensed, pulsating with a heavy aura. From under the mask, a sinister eye flashed, and he cold-bloodedly ordered his victim to sing. The shadows around surged upward like sharp blades. A mocking voice from the darkness dragged out that the most important thing in singing is proper breathing. He sharply extended his palm forward, adding that it starts right here. The next moment, the night silence was torn apart by a frantic, ragged scream of pain. Black energy enveloped his hand as he mockingly promised to break all the enemy's bones as a reward for passing the stage. An ominous laugh drowned in a flash of a terrifying purple aura. With one swing, he threw the bound opponent high into the night sky, against the backdrop of the full moon. A heavy boot slammed into the ground with a dull thud. He towered over the fallen body, mockingly lamenting that he never managed to master the second stage. A purple eye gleamed fiercely from beneath the mask. A low chuckle sounded in the darkness, a sharp crack. The unfinished mask finally transformed into a monster, bearing a terrible fanged maw. Quick footsteps were interrupted by someone's indignant shout. 3 stern men stepped forward, fiercely growling who this freak was. The monster in the mask only carelessly threw them a greeting. Swordsmen recoiled in cold sweat, stammering in horror. Recovering, they gripped their weapons tighter and shouted, demanding an answer as to how he dared to cause chaos in the Blackbone branch. He stood in puddles of foreign blood, and from beneath the half-mask flickered a violet eye. "Who I am is unimportant. Just join the feast," he said hoarsely. One of the fighters shouted that the madman was courting death himself, and flew into the air. The bald thug put all his weight into a devastating swing with a heavy sword. The clang of steel. The stranger did not even flinch. He playfully blocked the deadly strike with one hand. The attacker's eyes widened in horror as the enemy's blade counterattacked. A lightning-fast move, and the severed hand flew into the air, leaving a bloody trail behind. The body was still falling to the ground when the leader with the skull tattoo frantically ordered to kill him. The bandits took off from the spot. A death threat flew from the crowd, but the eyes behind the mask only flashed with a terrifying fire. His aura exploded with a black-purple storm. What kind of feast is without merriment? He smoothly stretched his hand forward, desperately urging them to resist. A concentrated wave of dark energy struck directly at the attackers. The fighters were scattered in different directions by a devastating hurricane of power, under the desperate scream of the leader. The dark aura swirled around his hand, and laughter burst from beneath the mask. For him, this slaughter was just a wonderful feast. Purple shadows pierced the enemies like spears through and through. He stood in the center of chaos, playing with others' lives, while magic mercilessly broke and threw the bodies of the fighters. A mountain of bloody corpses collapsed to the ground with a dull thud. The man smoothly emerged from the darkness. His white attire fluttered amid the ominous purple haze. He disdainfully surveyed the battlefield, throwing out disappointedly, "Is it already over?" He had just gotten into the groove. To at least somewhat quell his hunger, he gripped the only survivor from the ground with a deathly grasp. The enemy choked on tears and begged for mercy, while the monster cold-bloodedly chose which part of the body would satisfy him best. Suddenly, a dazzling blue flash cut through the air. He froze sharply. The deadly blade nearly took off his head, forcing him to jump back, and from the darkness, a rough question was asked. Who he was, anyway. The path was blocked by a burly swordsman armed with a sword. Now he would have to play with him. Blue and black collided at a single point. The swordsman sharply twisted in the air, releasing a powerful whirlwind of blue aura from under the blade. Dazzling arcs of energy cut through space with a roar. But the man in the mask did not even retreat, meeting the attack with a barrage of purple flashes. A step forward, and the stone cracked under his heavy boot. He towered over the opponent, who desperately raised his sword in defense. Eyes under the mask flashed with a terrifying violet light, and he said in surprise, "Could it be that finally a master has appeared who has mastered the true martial arts?" From the darkness rose a figure in white clothes and a mask, from which a thick black aura swirled. The warrior with a scar clenched his teeth and intercepted the sword, dripping with cold sweat. A sharp jerk. With a furious scream, he rushed at the enemy, raising the blade. In the air, he spun like a top, unleashing the spinning wheel technique on the opponent. But the masked one effortlessly blocked a hail of blue strikes with one hand. He laughed mockingly, gathering concentrated darkness in his palms. The space exploded with a dazzling violet light. The warrior pressed the sword against the barrier with his last strength, while the enemy mockingly asked if that was all he was capable of. "Go to hell!" cursed the swordsman, gasping heavily for air as a hand of darkness reached out to him. A powerful burst of black energy swept him into the air, mercilessly tearing his body apart. The warrior painfully wheezed. His body heavily thudded to the ground at the feet of the victor. The masked one only threw a cold glance over his shoulder, leaving the fallen enemy in the dust. The demonic face with burning eyes grimaced in disappointment. He had just gotten into the groove. Deep in the secret dungeon of the Blackbone Branch, darkness reigned. The silence was broken by measured footsteps. The boot indifferently stepped over the bloodied corpse. The long-haired swordsman in a mask calmly advanced deeper into the torture chamber. Suddenly he sharply narrowed his gaze. With a scream of "Die!" an enemy jumped on him from above with raised weapon. No panic, only a lightning-fast swing of the blade and a devastating explosion of purple energy. The attacker flew back and limply thudded onto the stone floor. The footsteps continued, but now a thick, dark aura swirled under the hero's feet. He entered the hall and froze. Dozens of mutilated bodies hung from chains under the ceiling, and a burly prisoner sat in the center. The eyes under the mask flared fiercely when the swordsman coldly asked what kind of place this was. Burning with violet flames, he eerily loomed over the survivor. He recoiled in madness from horror, begging not to come closer. A heavy boot forcefully stamped into the floor. The warrior in white stepped on the bandit's foot. A loud crack of a broken bone sounded. The giant screamed madly from pain in the middle of the hall, which resembled a bloody massacre. The stranger indifferently held the crippled enemy by the hair, against the backdrop of a boiling cauldron. Dead bodies hung eerily from the ceiling. This world had long since drowned in madness. The bandit, distorted by horror, shouted, calling the attacker a monster. In response, the warrior coldly asked if their own atrocities seemed normal to them. He crushed the enemy's head, but he continued to snap back and called his crimes ordinary business. The villain hysterically shouted that they killed exclusively for survival. A dark aura exploded with new strength, and the warrior sharply swung. A devastating fist hit the enemy's face, pressing his body into the stone floor. Bones cracked under a hail of merciless bloody blows. Finally stopping, the warrior touched his mask and thought that his execution was also pure madness. But these scoundrels for some reason called murders and human trafficking simply business. He gently covered the eyes of the crying girl with his palm, mentally asking himself who of the two had really gone mad, him or this world. The man turned around and walked into the darkness of the stone corridor. The action moved to the luxurious hideout of Kim Ju. A woman's legs smoothly lowered into the hot water, past a rose left on the edge of the pool. The blonde basked in the thick steam with a flower in her hands, recalling that very great air. Before her eyes appeared his confident image. In the morning reports of the Sword Clan, there was not a single word about his plans, so this exit was an absolute surprise to everyone. Memory caught a sharp movement of the hand over the fabric. She thoughtfully rested her chin on her palm. The real guy turned out to be surprisingly confident, and did not at all resemble the hero of those miserable rumors. Remaining so relaxed in the lair of armed mercenaries was too strange even for a person with elite protection, so the woman understood. He was hiding some trump card. No, he was too real. The woman interrupted herself. The man's loud shout behind the screen interrupted her thoughts. The servant immediately understood the lady's hint that the water had cooled. The warrior with a scar on his face strictly set his jaw, preparing to act. Two thugs mercilessly dragged away the bald poor man, who frantically begged for mercy, and the warrior coldly stated that because of this screamer, the bath was losing its freshness. The blonde was basking in the hot water, lazily noting that from now on, the selection of victims should be more thorough. Above the pool towered a burly executioner. In the blade of his giant sword was reflected the tearful face of the prisoner, who desperately begged for mercy. At her indifferent command, the executioner gripped the victim's hair tighter. The hilt tightened, and the massive blade with a whistle rushed down. The last cry of the captive drowned in a fountain of blood. The woman was not at all embarrassed by this. She only sighed discontentedly that recently she had been getting too many wrinkles. Scooping up full palms, she joyfully washed her face with hot, fresh blood. Her eyes flashed with a predatory red light, and a satisfied smile played on her lips. Her mad laughter broke the silence. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, an urgent message arrived at the mansion. One of their factories had been completely destroyed by someone. Dressed in a red kimono, the blonde sharply turned away from the mirror, demanding to name the culprit. The messenger reported confusedly that no one knew anything. The people at the factory were simply going mad and dying instantly. She angrily leaned over her subordinates, not understanding which bastard dared to challenge her. However, the few witnesses insisted on something terrifying. Allegedly, they saw an evil spirit, a monster, or a real hungry ghost. The subordinate asked confusedly, "Evil spirit? Monster?" Her eyes dangerously narrowed. Suddenly, words from the report surfaced in memory. One of the witnesses mentioned the appearance of a white mask. At this thought, she clenched her teeth until they cracked, and a heavy crimson aura swirled around her body. The woman in red sighed discontentedly. The witnesses died so quickly that there was no one left to question. She assumed that they had recklessly crossed the path of some master. Her assistant nervously shuddered, recalling how last year an entire branch completely disappeared because of one such traveler. There are very few people capable of controlling chi energy from birth, and those who break all barriers and become the absolute in martial arts are extremely rare. The manager irritably tossed her hair back. In their affairs, these unique masters appear at every turn. She strictly ordered her people to lie low. If they stay quiet and wait it out, this avenger will quickly vent steam and leave. With annoyance, the woman added that it is not worth filling children's heads with nonsense about heroes from an early age. The world must be able to be obeyed, and the subordinates obediently nodded. Suddenly, the muscular warrior thoughtfully rubbed his chin, muttering about some hungry demon. The manageress sharply turned around. A tense pause hung in the air. The subordinate grimly reported that the contractor's son from their gambling house suddenly vanished a few days ago. The man in black calmly reminded that everyone had long turned a blind eye to the constant disappearances of contractors. His interlocutor nervously faltered, covered in cold sweat. The blonde instantly flared up with anger and barked, demanding not to stay silent. The warrior admitted, in the gambling house, he had heard strange rumors, which he himself barely believed. However, there were too many witnesses to continue ignoring these talks. The woman sharply waved him off, calling it all a deathbed delirium. She irritably stated that business people have no time for idle chatter. Suddenly her eyes widened with a dreadful suspicion. Could it be that someone else with her teacher's skills had appeared? Memory instantly conjured a frightening silhouette of a mentor from unknown martial arts, and she gasped. The doors slammed wide open. Anxious thoughts were shattered by the cry of a beaten subordinate who burst into the hall. Another branch had fallen. The woman sharply raised her gaze at the bloodied messenger. She immediately asked again about the attacker in the white mask, and the messenger confirmed the worst. She wearily rubbed her face. The destruction of several more buildings was only a matter of time, until this madman let off steam. The woman's eyes gleamed predatory. The enemy was too quickly destroying establishments guarded by experienced fighters. The stranger in the white mask turned out to be a great master, so the most advantageous thing was simply to leave him alone. Crossing her arms over her chest, she coldly reasoned that dead subordinates could always be quickly replaced. The beaten subordinate with a scar grimly reminded that hiring new masters would cost a fortune. The mistress waved irritably and ordered everyone to leave, demanding to bring the masseur immediately. The wounded men obediently bowed their heads. A tense silence settled in the room. Suddenly, the door slammed open to a panic-stricken scream about new trouble. The woman turned sharply, paling with rage. Could it be him again? A black aura of destructive power instantly spread from her feet. Meanwhile, a loud rooster crow echoed over Loyan. The morning sun illuminated the majestic roofs of the capital, beginning a new day. Anxious rumors spread through the city. Overnight, someone destroyed 5 dens of the Blackbone gang, though some already spoke of 7. Another man confidently denied this, claiming there were as many as 10. In the noisy market, the gossip grew even faster. They spoke of 15 smashed bases. People whispered fearfully that no corpses or even a drop of blood remained at the battle sites. Countless bandits simply vanished without a trace. Everyone was interested in only one thing: who was behind this total cleanup? Meanwhile, above the territory of the mighty Sword Clan from Loyan, the sun shone carefreely. However, tension prevailed in the main pavilion. The patriarch irritably asked why he was being disturbed from early morning over such trifles. A blonde woman in a red dress stood before his throne and inquired whether their sprawling clan had truly gathered no information about the night events. The leader's face instantly darkened with rage, for he was offended by the very doubt in the omniscience of the great Sword Clan. The woman flinched fearfully at his icy tone and hastily apologized. She bowed her head guiltily before the enraged master. But the patriarch did not soften, and sharply cut in that the guest, it seemed, had forgotten her place. His eyes flashed with crimson light, and a devastating aura compressed the air in the hall. The woman sweated from tension, and began feverishly assuring the lord that she had not even thought to request a token of the Sword Clan, thanks to her father's influence. She tensely froze in the middle of the spacious hall, just behind his back. The man remained sternly silent, and nearby on the table sand slowly poured in a large hourglass. Finally, he dryly cut in that he had just wasted 15 minutes because of her, and he ordered to leave immediately out of sight. In his hand was clenched an unopened scroll, and his gaze remained icy. The blonde woman bowed submissively and low. She turned around and silently headed towards the exit. The lord unrolled the scroll and sharply threw it at her back. If she disappoints him again, the woman shuddered and stopped. Then the copper token will pass to someone else. Her face instantly twisted with absolute horror. No sound escaped from her throat, and in the clear sky above the estate, white clouds floated carefreely. The morning in the Sword Clan from Luoyang began with a loud order to wake up. However, instead of training, the young man was sweetly snoring right on the desk covered with books. The man in blue wearily covered his face with his hand, realizing that words would not help here. With a single jerk, he grabbed the sleepyhead by the collar and shouted about trouble, causing him to jump in fright. Handing over the water, the guard sharply ordered him to come to his senses and began to talk about the alarming night watch, although the boy only grumbled that these efforts were appreciated by no one anyway. The man frowned and said directly that he had seen a red omen. The young man lazily sipped the water, brushing off that such signs appeared constantly, until he heard the terrible clarification. The omen was great. He froze instantly. Last night the watchman saw how brightly the star of the heavenly killer burned. Sweat rolled down his forehead. The appearance of this celestial body always meant the arrival of one who brings only blood and death. The rumor about the appearance of the legendary star of the heavenly killer seriously frightened both warriors. The swordsman with a scar gloomily sank into a chair. If this was true, great trouble was approaching. His partner nervously grabbed his head, begging to immediately report everything to the higher-ups. But he only waved it off with laughter. In their time, no one would believe tales about the mythical star. Then, the young man suggested at least warning their immediate commander. The young man fell silent, tensely. The swordsman rejected this idea too. What's the point if their leader is the worst weakling in the entire Great Sword Clan? This relaxed, smiling young man in white rather resembled a carefree traveler than a formidable warrior. A quiet step. Meanwhile, night quietly descended on the clan's territory. A crowd of people surrounded the old canopy, impatiently demanding any news. The guard irritably scolded the criers. Now is not the time. The lord is deep in thought. The lord himself, a dirty, overgrown blind man, sat motionless on the bare ground in absolute silence. The sky was covered with thick darkness. The blind elder muttered hoarsely that the sun had disappeared forever, and the sky was covered with impenetrable darkness. Suddenly, he sharply shuddered. He stepped forward uncertainly, stunned by a sudden premonition. Raising his hands, the madman shouted about the coming of the Lord of the Dark Heavens, while his body was enveloped by a pulsating aura. The clouds above him swirled, as if the very demonic scripture had awakened to devour the light. The old man felt the eerie presence of a millennial monster. The grandfather threw back his head and burst into wild laughter. Two random passers-by stared bewilderedly at the old man, who suddenly began to call all the downtrodden to rejoice. In a trance, he laughed hysterically, promising that the new lord would tear the indifferent heavens with a black lightning bolt. The men only nervously exchanged glances, finally convinced that the old man had simply lost his mind. Ignoring them, he enchantedly stretched out his hand toward the swirling darkness. With wild laughter, he sprang from his place toward his true master. In the flashes appeared a figure in a bone mask with a burning eye, a ghost, before whom everyone must bow their head and answer for their sins without concealment. The sky was split by a violet lightning bolt. The messenger of punishment had come, and no sinner would find salvation anymore. A dazzling flash of purple energy cut through the air. The news struck like thunder. The Blackbone gang was on the brink of collapse in just 2 days. Silence hung over the distant forest. The morning sun illuminated the roofs of the majestic estate. In her office, C, a woman with an eye patch, tensely recalled the main lead, the hungry demon and the Lord of Darkness. A chilling silhouette with a black aura clearly emerged in her memory. She was absolutely sure she had seen the white mask itself. C sharply turned to her bodyguard, asking for her opinion. Hugh was confused, so Sia had to remind her. It was about the great heir of the Sword Clan, whom she had ordered to be constantly watched. The bodyguard dismissively waved it off, recalling him only as a person who did not even wield a weapon. Sia furiously slammed her fist on the table, demanding never to speak about him like that again. Hugh hastily apologized and added that upon meeting, the boy seemed completely different to her than the rumors described. The woman's gaze became icy. She strictly forbade Hugh from babbling unnecessarily and telling anyone about their work in the Hyunwall Pavilion. A tense pause hung in the air. The woman closed her eyes, acknowledging that the young man thought surprisingly broadly and had a big heart. She admitted the boy did not even blink when she tried to crush him with her aura and thirst for murder. The one-eyed listener tensed, squinting tightly. A sudden scream shattered the silence. Above the roofs of the estate, an outraged shriek sounded. Someone was wildly yelling at Hugh, demanding explanations for his actions. Meanwhile, under the ceiling of the quiet kitchen, supplies gently swayed. The one-eyed girl in a black cloak silently approached the woman who was busy near the blazing stove. She turned around, immediately guessing that the conversation would again be about her master. The warrior woman carelessly leaned against the wall, explaining that she just wanted to know which person her own sister served. The sister turned away and monotonously tapped a knife on the board, dryly saying that she had nothing to tell. The one-eyed woman was restless, recalling how last time the mention of the great heir caused a stormy reaction. She smiled awkwardly, remembering how her sister's neck veins bulged then, and cautiously inquired about her well-being. The girl smiled gently, assuring that she was absolutely fine. The one-eyed woman grew serious, looked at her intently, and suggested not hiding thoughts but directly asking about everything that interested her. The final decision was made. It was best to meet him in person. Hot tea poured in a thin stream into the white bowl. At the table in the spacious hall, the young man calmly asked his companion to hide the urge to kill so as not to spoil the taste of the drink. The female guard, with a soft smile, assured that worrying was pointless. Her mission was already completed. The one-eyed guest opposite tensed sharply, not understanding what mission was being referred to at all. The young man only smiled slyly and advised drinking the tea immediately. The one-eyed woman thanked awkwardly, grumbling discontentedly that a bodyguard should not fuss so much. However, the girl quickly jumped back, readily accepting the treat from the great heir. She demonstratively enjoyed the aroma and praised the young man's tastes, while the one-eyed woman mentally cursed the impudent girl. The heir gently blew on the tea, pleased with such a high opinion of himself. The guard gently objected. She was not at all the type to throw words to the wind. Her fingers carefully grasped the porcelain. The young man laughed sincerely and offered her to come to him if she ever decided to change jobs. The guard slyly glanced at the angry boss and nodded with a smile. Judging by the boss's mood, dismissal was not far off. The young man in light clothing leaned back in the chair and laughed loudly. The maid nearby mentally wondered. Her lady, who usually could not stand people, behaved so casually with this boy. A relaxed smile played on his face. He ironically asked why such a busy person had come to an ordinary idler at all. The heir slowly folded his hands on the table in front of the tea set. The guest sat opposite and, after a short pause, respectfully addressed him. Her fingers nervously clenched into a lock from the tension. "Are you the Lord of Darkness?" she dared to ask directly, shedding a drop of sweat. The young man calmly took the tea bowl and quietly asked who exactly was being talked about. The woman did not back down and cited the words of the fugitives who survived the defeat of the Blackbone branch. According to their stories, the mysterious savior hid his face behind a white mask, and he was dressed in simple cotton clothing, which scholars usually wear. The heir gently squinted and noted that this stranger, apparently, does good deeds. The guest pierced him with her single eye and cut off. The great heir wears exactly the same clothes and mask. The man with the blindfold calmly held the tea bowl, asking with a slight smile if she planned to finish inspecting his belongings. The woman, confused, pressed her hand to her chest, demanding answers. Why he was silent, and what his previous words meant. He only smiled silently. With a quiet thud, the tea bowl lay on the table. The bandage disappeared from his face. He looked piercingly at her with sharp eyes, and asked if she was ready. She looked harshly and unwaveringly, stamping that she was ready for anything. The man opposite smiled softly and replied, was she ready for the death of countless innocents? Her face instantly turned to stone. Since then, this question constantly gnawed at her soul. She replayed these words in her head, again and again. Imagination painted a bloody mess, capable of rewriting the very course of history. At the very thought of exchanging human lives, her fist clenched with a crunch. A heavy silence hung under the carved vault of the hall. Composing herself, she asked the great heir bluntly if he really intended to overthrow the dynasty. He only crossed his arms confidently and with a slight smile tried her words for taste. Tension soared to the limit when the woman burst out with a quote from an ancient sage. "The enemy of humanity is no more than a robber." Her voice rang with determination. "Every tyrant who commits atrocities is only mortal." The heir did not even blink, casually resting his hands near the warm bowl. In the crimson reflection of the tea, his predatory gaze flashed as he calmly stated, "To kill a tyrant does not mean to kill a ruler." She looked away, suddenly realizing the full depth and ruthlessness of the path he had chosen. The woman in black froze, tensing her hands folded on her knees. Her imagination was torn apart by horrifying visions, mountains of corpses and rivers of blood, as if from the darkest demonic writings. Is such a hellish judgment possible in their real world? The woman with the eye patch wilted, admitting that this question was far beyond her modest understanding. Even if all the sages of the continent were gathered together, their verdict would not change. The man in white clothes sitting opposite spoke about an unprecedented chasm in history between the rich and the poor. He was frankly surprised by this unnatural stability. Under such conditions, revolution would seem unthinkable. The interlocutor silently covered her eye, listening attentively. Then he abruptly got to the point. "Which path will the great heir choose?" The woman opened her eyes in shock. Cold sweat appeared on her temple. The man calmly continued, "If blood must be shed for the sake of changing the course of history, is it right for only the blood of the innocent to be shed?" His gaze became sharp and icy. Those innocents who do not see a normal life and simply perish under foreign flags. Around his head suddenly thickened a sinister dark aura. What if instead of them, the same number of scoundrels were simply wiped out? He smiled predatorily, looking at her with burning red eyes. The woman with the eye patch asked confusedly, not understanding his words. She tensed, anticipating something bad. The man with an unshakable smile threw out a crazy idea. What if exactly the same amount of villain's blood is shed? She sharply replied that such jokes are inappropriate, since words about the blood of the innocent are never understood literally. He calmly got up from the table and waved it off, as if to say, "It's just a supposition." The man moved toward the exit, leaving her to ponder over this phrase. The woman mentally resented his childish logic. How can people be so easily divided into good and evil, and moreover, by incomprehensible criteria? His silhouette froze in the sunlight as he explained that law and morality change too easily under pressure of circumstances. She stubbornly stood her ground. In the world, there simply is no person capable of cutting down so many enemies for the sake of changing history. The woman flatly stated that only a true madman, who is himself an even greater evil, could carry out such vigilante justice. Suddenly, her single eye widened in shock. Out of nowhere appeared a hand with the white mask of the Reaper, radiating a sinister aura. The space was torn apart by a vortex of dark energy of the Lord of the Dark Heavens, the messenger of punishment, ready to unleash a black lightning on the world instead of indifferent gods. The man looked over his shoulder, radiating a heavy purple aura. The one-eyed woman froze in shock at the table. The title, Lord of Darkness, suited him perfectly. A predatory, self-satisfied smile spread across his face. This assumption seemed completely absurd. The woman sighed, pondering aloud whether this lord would manage to carry out his plan to the end. He only smiled relaxedly, as if he himself wondered whether it was even possible. Her thoughts were dark. Instead of the innocent, this young man was cutting down villains, walking the path of a merciless demon who had finally renounced humanity. The woman's eye flashed with cold determination. She abruptly stood up, dryly thanked for the conversation, and headed for the exit. The man calmly watched her with his gaze, throwing a brief acknowledgement of her hard work after her. His boot quietly stepped onto the wooden floor. A short pause hung in the air. Already beside her assistant, the woman cold-bloodedly assessed the situation. Only the main base survived from the enemy gang Blackbone, and it is there that she will deliver the decisive blow today, together with her elite fighters. The man warned that attacking was too dangerous. The Sword Clan would ignore any excuses, since Kim Ju had their copper token. The one-eyed warrior calmly cut in that they would not even go inside. Others would be found for that. But she was not going to wait idly. Today, not a single soul would leave the base. If the Sword Clan decided to pick a fight over this, it would not stop her. She was ready for battle, for their true target was not the entire clan, but only those who had given the token to Kim Ju. A satisfied smile spread across his face. They turned around and walked away, fully prepared for such an ending. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a sharp rumble. He immediately turned toward the sunlit exit. One decisive step forward. The space was instantly cut through by a blood-red flash of a sword. The attackers angrily shouted at their backs that no one runs from the gang. One of the fugitives fell heavily, face down into the dust. The scarred warrior fiercely called the attackers cowards, shouting that he was carrying out a direct order from Lady Kim Ju. The wounded swordsman snarled fiercely, bleeding profusely. He raised the bloodied blade high and ordered everyone to prepare for an honorable death. The crowd of sullen fighters froze before their leader. A calm evening enveloped the roofs of Kim Ju's shelter. Inside, a blonde woman in a red dress dryly asked a subordinate if the father had refused them help again. The messenger tensely averted his gaze. The woman irritably leaned over the table, fully understanding that no one would throw a valuable master at an unknown enemy. Her teeth ground. Her fist clenched to trembling. For Kim Jil, the adopted daughters were only expendable material. Suddenly, the servant cautiously added that the Lord had asked to convey something else. She sharply turned around, demanding to speak faster. The man sweated and flinched when she fiercely barked at him. The heard news instantly distorted her face with pure animal rage. With a wild scream, she overturned the massive wooden table in one jerk. Breathing heavily through clenched teeth, the blonde sharply asked how many slaves remained at the base. She loomed threateningly over the servant, who looked fearfully at the floor. The man nervously justified himself. There was almost no trading at the main base. So few people remained. In the woman's thoughts emerged the eerie, red-eyed silhouette of her teacher. She had not wanted to use his secret technique until the last moment. "Damn," she hissed, and in despair grabbed her head against the backdrop of a blood-red aura. Her next order made the servant shudder. Immediately drive all the slaves and unnecessary non-combat personnel into the basement. A dark fog began to fill the space as she announced that she would perform the master's ritual. Smearing blood on her cheek, the woman grinned with a predatory, insane smile. The screen was engulfed in complete darkness. The evening wind whistled over the pagodas against the crimson sky. The silence was broken by a sharp crow's cry. A blackbird flew over the deserted streets, illuminated by red lanterns. In the dense shadow, someone's feet silently froze. The squad in black crouched in the alley. One of the fighters quietly ordered to hold positions because the target had not yet appeared. The clan emblem was clearly visible on his shoulder. A crow brushed its wing right in front of the faces of the killers. They reflexively caught their blades. The bird disappeared into the darkness, above the heads of the group that continued to hide under the wall. Meanwhile, another scout softly landed on the neighboring roof. His gaze slid coldly over the outskirts, from under the mask. He cast a quick glance at his partner, who was settled on the higher tier of the wall. A firm step broke the silence. The scouts reported to the commander that the 5th squad had already taken position. 3 subordinates lined up before their leader, waiting for orders. A stern, mustached man briefly confirmed the group's readiness for action. The man in the black mask respectfully folded his hands over his chest. A swift surge. Dark silhouettes, one after another, leapt over the roofs against the backdrop of a crimson sky. A heavy boot thudded dully against the boards. The scout arrived at the commander's quarters. Bending his knee, he reported, "The local residents have been evacuated. All agents and allies took positions and awaited orders." A confident smile flickered on her lips. She ordered to stay vigilant and act according to the combat regulations as soon as the signal sounded. The woman with the eye patch listened attentively to the report. Her fingers calmly clenched the dark fabric of her attire. The subordinate barked that he would carry out the order. Above the majestic pagodas, the evening slowly faded. The commander froze in silence. A warm wind swirled dust motes over the empty balcony. She turned to her silent assistant. It was time to act. The woman with the eye patch calmly admitted that she felt not anxiety, but rather confusion. The interlocutor reminded her of the overheard conversation with the great heir, but she sharply cut off, saying she went deaf exactly at the word revolution, and demanded to be removed from this matter. The woman in the black mask only snorted mockingly, advising not to play the fool. Her gaze became stern. She wanted to know what the subordinate really thought about the heir. Recalling the eerie aura of the Lord of Darkness, the one-eyed woman unexpectedly called him a good person. She had no logical reasons for this. She simply trusted her own intuition. The leader silently listened to this frankness. "Ma'am, I will follow you anywhere," the warrior loyally added. "Do as your heart commands." A short, tense pause. The leader's fingers dug into the wooden support with a crunch. Having mastered herself, she placed her palm on the subordinate's shoulder and quietly agreed. The one-eyed woman turned around and decisively strode away. Left alone, the masked woman once again replayed in her mind the heir's words about endless killing of villains for the sake of a new world. In complete darkness, a thought echoed. Madness. Yet still, the footsteps abruptly stopped. The woman with the emblem on her eye patch cautiously looked over her shoulder. Before her stood Yan So-hyun, the great heir of the Sword Clan and the Lord of Darkness. In the dense violet haze of his aura, a hope flickered that he could do it. Energy flared, tearing through space. Meanwhile, above the main base of the Blackbone gang, a bloody sunset blazed. The giant covered in skull tattoos grimly clenched his weapon, his mutilated face twisted with rage. The fighter in black muttered that all sorts of scum had let loose, and his squad bared their blades. The leader shouted at his men, asking why they were standing still. The trio of swordsmen confidently moved straight towards the crowd. With a wild roar and an order to attack immediately, the gang of cutthroats rushed forward. Amid the enemy's furious scream, the fighter calmly caught the sword hilt, preparing for a counterstrike. With a wild cry, the swordsman brought down the heavy blade with all his might. The weapon sliced through the air with a whistle. He froze in confusion as blood flew right before him. From behind him, a bald, tattooed giant with an axe jumped out, stunned by the bloody fountain. His eyes instantly widened with animal terror. A short whistle of wind from someone's sudden movement. A foot firmly struck a stone. From the shadow emerged a warrior in a mask, and with a single swing of his sword, deeply cut open the chest of a strong man. Without losing speed, he pounced like a predatory shadow on the next target. Crimson splashes swirled thickly in the air. The next bandit groaned dully as the blade pierced him through. The yard instantly turned into a bloody massacre. The lone warrior cold-bloodedly cut down the crowd, ignoring pleas for mercy. The wounded strongman dropped his axe and collapsed with a wheeze, vainly clutching the gaping wound. One of the survivors screamed in panic that this would not do, realizing that their gang was simply being wiped out. The crowd was torn apart by loud shouts. People demanded to immediately make way for those coming from behind. Two fighters in masks sharply turned toward the growing roar. The eyes of one of them widened with uncontrollable horror. Straight from the sky, a deadly rain of sharp spears fell upon them. Right before them, a palisade of trembling pikes rose up. The warriors froze. A panic scream cut through the air. A hail of weapons mercilessly pierced the ground and roofs. A messenger in a mask rushed to the female commander and reported a sudden attack by spearmen. He blurted out that the enemies were increasing in number. It seemed they had even thrown the guards of their own main base into battle. The leader with an eye patch coldly ordered to send all reserves, and sharply dismissed the subordinate. Left alone, she gloomily pondered. The enemy had exposed the base for the sake of initiative, but she knew these tricks with hidden mercenaries well. Only one thing gnawed at her. Would they have enough people after sending the last reserves? Meanwhile, elsewhere, one of the men confidently stated that reinforcements would arrive soon, since the Blackbone gang had made many powerful enemies. His interlocutor only shockingly reminded him of the copper token of the Sword Clan from Loyan. In the world, there was hardly a suicide willing to challenge such power. The subordinate in a mask guiltily averted her gaze, cautiously reporting to the confident young man. She admitted that she had foolishly taken all the responsibility upon herself, when suddenly, a cry about the Lord of Darkness echoed through the corridors. The woman with the eye patch tensed, clinging to hope in the legendary power of this lord. Someone's palm nervously lay on the railing, and the space suddenly tore apart with a dreadful roar. A furious, fiery explosion engulfed part of the estate. The walls trembled. The shockwave mercilessly threw the figure in the black cloak into the air. The eye of the woman with the bandage widened in shock. Sharp fragments flew around with a whistle. Through the roar, a desperate call to the lady pierced. A strong hand sharply grabbed the fabric in midair. The subordinate in the mask managed to catch her lady, saving her from a harsh blow to the ground. The guard anxiously pressed the lady to herself while she blinked stunned, trying to comprehend this sudden chaos. Thick dust rapidly enveloped the red columns. The building roared into flames, collapsing right before their eyes. Through the crackling fire burst a malicious, insane laughter. The man in black barely managed to pull the woman with the bandage away from the deadly flash. She froze in horror, never finishing her proof. From the darkness flashed a predatory smile, distorted by a scar. Kim-ju! A desperate scream drowned in bloody splashes. In the center of the fiery hell stood a blonde in red, radiating a devastating dark aura. Her face, marred by veins, was twisted by a sadistic snarl, and her crimson eye burned with the lust for murder. A crimson explosion pierced the pavilion's roof. The shockwave shattered the room to pieces. From the cloud of dust emerged a wounded woman with a bandage over her eye, heavily leaning on the shoulder of a loyal subordinate. She froze in shock. From the smoke reached a terrifying red paw towards her. Cutting through the fire, the enraged blonde flew at them. Through the flames, she fiercely spat out the name Kim Ju. Her demonic claws clenched fiercely. The subordinate shuddered in horror, not understanding how a person could turn into such a monster. The attacker's distorted face spread into a mad smile, and she growled the title of the pavilion head. Wrapped in a bloody aura, the creature lunged into attack. The loyal assistant sharply rushed to intercept, shielding her lady. The enemy descended from above with a devastating strike. The girl's body was thrown backward helplessly from the terrible collision. Already falling, she desperately begged the mistress to run, while she helplessly reached out to her and called her by name. "Gyu, you must survive," she shouted desperately. The warrior with the eye patch charged into attack. A black strike cut through the space, under the cry for the great success. Following a crimson haze, the call of the Lord of Darkness sounded. The girl froze and sharply turned around. From the bloody mist came the thunderous question of where he was and what he was doing. The sky flared up. A sharp whistle sounded. Near the burning temple appeared an angry blonde man in red. He chased across the yard, shouting at the fugitive that he was running like a rat. "Stop, Kim Ju! Your opponent is me!" He barked at the dark figure's back. His eyes filled with blood from anger. The swordsman grinned and croaked, "To get lost, if you wanted to live." The masked assassin did not answer, only cold-bloodedly held his blade forward. The warrior in the black mask tensed, burning the enemy with his gaze. He clenched the sword until the bones turned white, reminding himself of his own pride. He was not going to give up so easily, but suddenly he felt an insurmountable wall before him. Complete darkness. Experts in martial arts often repeat one truth. Sooner or later, every fighter hits a limit where their growth stops dead. The silhouette of the master stepped into the light, leaving a long shadow behind. And those who still overcame that obstacle became like different people. Only those who go further again discover the path to absolute power. People who manage to break through this barrier are called masters by the world. The bald warrior calmly folded his palms, and his body flared with a burning golden aura. The air was cut with a whistle by a red flash from a sudden attack. The youth's pupil dilated from primal horror at the power of the monster opposite. Cold sweat rolled down his cheek, for unlike this monster, he had only just reached his own wall. Blonde with burning eyes raised a terrible clawed paw of bloody energy above her head. With a sharp whistle, she rushed forward. Such power undoubtedly revealed her as a true master. Her face twisted into a predatory smile. A giant claw struck the floor, splitting the stone, but the killer in the mask barely managed to jump back. She landed heavily in cold sweat, catching a piercing red gaze on herself. A new deadly sweep of the bloody paw cut through the air. The ninja desperately twisted in the jump, fleeing from a hail of giant energy blades. The attacker's golden hair wildly fluttered in the epicenter of the battle. The warrior woman realized with horror that something was wrong with her hand, barely managing to raise a hard block against a new strike. Amid dazzling bloody flashes, she panicked, not understanding what was happening at all, and the enemy relentlessly stepped forward. The space was torn by a deafening explosion. The blonde demonically burst into laughter, baring her fangs, and openly mocked her rival. How she dared to challenge her with such a pathetic strength. At that very moment, a merciless storm of dozens of bloody palms descended on the ninja. The killer fell from the sky like a stone, driving the sword straight into the target. The ground instantly split from the force of the blow. But instead of a corpse, he saw a predatory snarl. The blonde one firmly gripped his wrist with a demonic paw. The killer froze. The enemy disdainfully said that before him was a pathetic insect. A red aura exploded with a roar to get away. A pillar of burning energy struck upward. A devastating explosion thundered. Thrown back by the shockwave, the killer flew backward, spitting blood. He landed harshly, breaking the floor with his body, and coughed weakly. The sword fell dull nearby. Through dust and smoke stepped a bare foot, covered with beastly claws. The blonde stood tall above him, and his face pulsed with strained veins. A shadow covered the fallen one, and he instinctively shrank back in horror. Kim Ju snarled fiercely. She frankly did not expect the rival to survive such a blow. The girl in the mask, meanwhile, was only gasping for air. Leaning on the floor with a bloodied hand, she feverishly understood. Continuous use of energy exhausts the body, and it will not last long. A memory of a recent attack exploded in her mind. It turned out Kim Ju scattered those crimson waves without even drawing a weapon. She was hitting with bare hands. Looking at the enraged blonde in the whirl of aura, the girl could not comprehend what was happening to her body at all. Red energy restlessly crawled along her forearm. Exhausted, she sank to one knee but firmly gripped the sword, not taking her eyes off the enemy. At that moment, Kim Ju's face contorted with rage, and veins bulged on her skin with a crackling sound. The victim's silence in response to the praise finally irritated her. The space around was instantly torn apart by the explosion of a bloody aura. Thick, dark energy swirled around the blonde in a deadly vortex. The girl in the mask was paralyzed by cold horror from this thirst for murder, while Kim Ju mockingly offered to block her next strike. Laughing amid the storm of crimson lightning, she raised her hands. A deadly wave surged forward, leaving only panic before the inevitable in the victim's eyes. The air was torn by a desperate scream about imminent death. A huge spiked gauntlet, radiating bloody energy, whistled down onto the victim. The young man with a blindfold swiftly slid toward the strike. The girl in the black mask widened her eyes in shock, not understanding who suddenly intervened in the fight. The boy exhaled dully, blocking the deadly weapon with his armored gauntlet. A calm smile played on his lips. Reinforcements had finally arrived. At that very moment, a powerful strike cut through the space, throwing someone back with a frantic scream. The enemy froze in confusion from the unexpected counterattack. The ally softly and confidently landed on his feet. The girl with two buns on her head happily wiped the blood from her cheek and exclaimed that everything was fine now. A sharp shout warned them as a new dazzling attack suddenly flew at them. The burly bearded man instantly shielded the girls with his body, swinging his heavy sword to deflect the enemy's strike. Assessing the terrible power of the opponent, the man grimly admitted that they might not get out of here alive. But the girl resolutely stood back to back with him. If they combined their strength, they would seize this victory. The woman in the black mask was covered in cold sweat and desperately asked about reinforcements. The girl nearby barely held back tears. Now everything depended only on them. 3 warriors froze in the middle of the smoke-filled hall, cut off from the world. Realizing there was no choice, the masked woman firmly gripped the sword's hilt. The big guy and the girl also raised their weapons, and right in front of them raged a real hurricane of bloody energy, at the center of which stood their enemy. From behind this terrifying aura came a mocking voice. He inquired whether they had finished their meeting. The blond man's face stretched into a maniacal smile, and his eyes blazed with demonic light. Wrapped in a red aura, he bared his blade and mockingly ordered them to attack, one by one. The sky above the estate blazed with a bloody sunset, streaked with black ash. Against the backdrop of roofs engulfed in flames, fluttered a torn sleeve with the clan's emblem. In the yard, wounded fighters in black bustled about, and a woman with an eye patch clenched her teeth from tension. She froze in confusion. The main pavilion flared up, throwing thick smoke clouds into the sky amid someone's desperate scream. The woman sharply asked her subordinate if any combat-capable masters remained, but heard a resigned no. Realizing the scale of the disaster, the commander burst into a scream, ordering the 3rd squad to retreat immediately. Beside him, a warrior screamed wildly, holding his bloody, dying comrade in his arms. Suddenly, the woman and her assistant flinched. Their path was abruptly blocked by an unknown man with long hair. From everywhere came the panic cries of comrades about retreat and pleas for help, and the commander's face was distorted by horror. She silently gripped the weapon's handle. In the bloody silence, a confused voice sounded. But why? This is unthinkable. A sharp clang of steel tore through the air above the rooftops. The unknown man flew like a whirlwind into the crowd of enemies, with the first swing of his blade cutting off the tattooed hand of a burly killer. A huge blade with a bloody trail swiftly descended. The strike broke through the defense, sparking fiery sparks and causing the enemy to scream wildly. From the heavy landing, the ground beneath the feet cracked. The heavy weapon stuck firmly in the stone, tearing a hoarse wheeze from the wounded man's throat. The observer in the mask froze. This incredible power could belong only to a monster, and the enemy with a pierced stomach did not even grimace from the pain. With a demonic look, he clenched the foreign blade with his bare hands. A sharp kick. The space instantly exploded with a pillar of fiery energy. The young man in black soared into the air, and with his whole body mass, slammed the savage into the floor. And the next second, he mercilessly punched him in the solar plexus with his fist. The killer in the mask sharply swung the sword and fiercely rushed into attack. The darkness was cut by bloody sparks. They slowly smoldered in the air, and then everything sank into darkness. A hoarse cough drowned in blood. The sword blade pierced through the enemy's head. An instant bloody slash cut through the darkness. The warrior cold-bloodedly pulled out the blade, and the dead giant heavily fell onto the cobblestones. Coming towards him with a fierce scream was the next bandit. A short swing of the sword cut the attacker, causing another mercenary to scream in panic for mercy. The burning courtyard turned into a complete meat grinder. The survivor realized with horror that this was real hell. Suddenly, the walls of the building shook from a devastating blow. Thick dust and debris rushed through the wooden corridor. A man, torn apart, was bleeding on the floor. Nearby, someone was convulsively gasping for air with their mouth. The wounded swordswoman, with a bloodied eye, shielded the girl, tightly gripping her weapon. From the crimson smoke emerged the silhouette of the enemy, who mockingly said, "Oh, is that all?" The blonde with blood-red eyes smiled ominously from within the fiery aura. She was openly expecting more. Space was torn apart by a sharp crimson flash. The dark-haired warrior woman anxiously turned to the frightened scream of her companion. The protective green artifact could not withstand the magical pressure, and cracked. The younger girl choked on blood, her eyes wide open from sudden pain. The enemy only burst into maniacal laughter, mocking their weakness, while the warrior woman panicked and bent over the wounded. The blonde mockingly promised to send their master after them very soon, so they would not be lonely in the afterlife. The warrior woman clenched her teeth until they cracked. Realizing the hopelessness, she burst into a scream, ordering her lady to escape immediately. In the thick cloud of dust, all that remained was to believe that the girl managed to flee unharmed. A hand with a deathly grip lay on the sword's hilt. A defiant smile suddenly appeared on the bloodied face of the warrior woman. She perfectly understood that the chances of survival were zero, but her gaze burned with pure determination. The blade whistled out of the sheath. She will not retreat. The blond man in a whirlwind of bloody aura grimaced horribly and declared that the games were over. Crimson energy struck forward. He ordered the victim to go to the other world first and wait there for his master. The black-haired fighter froze when his face was illuminated by an ominous red flash. The air was torn by a desperate scream, addressed to the Lord. The girl with the eye patch suddenly shuddered. She turned around in panic over her shoulder. In the distance, the roof of the huge palace was simply blown away by a destructive explosion, while someone frantically shouted the name Gyu. The world suddenly inverted and lost its color, as if time stopped, and the girl stretched out her hand in horror. In absolute silence, a tear slowly rolled down from her eye. A group of masked assassins looked around in confusion, not understanding why the space was suddenly engulfed in darkness. Everything around was instantly frozen by icy cold, from which steam broke out with heavy breaths. A solid night fell. In this darkness, a ghostly silhouette, lightning fast, closed the distance and pierced the chest of one of the mercenaries. The face of another enemy froze in animal terror before the inevitable blow. The crowd of armed fighters suddenly froze, staring up in horror. They all felt it. Someone's pale foot heavily crushed a shadow, foretelling the advance of the night that covered the pagoda with thick violet darkness. And at that moment, the girl with the headband was seized by sticky fear. Ominous energy around the building swirled with new strength. A black vortex opened in the sky, from which a muffled voice sounded. "Were you waiting for me?" The girl sharply turned at the sound. A creepy, clawed hand was already reaching out from the portal. In the complete darkness, a predatory gaze flashed. The voice broke off from shock at the very first word. From the purple smoke before them stood the pale-faced Reaper himself. A sudden sound cut through the silence of the evening sky. The young man in light clothing looked down impassively. Long hair was slowly stirred by the warm wind. He squinted his cold eyes and asked a direct question. What exactly is the demonic Tsi? In the darkness opposite him sat a grim old man in a hood. The hermit clenched his hands, covered with deep scars, and muttered something about the demonic Tsi. A bloody mirage flashed before his eyes. Figures of people were mercilessly torn to pieces by this devastating force. A distorted face screamed in agony as the sinister aura completely burned out the human essence. Claws tore at their own flesh in unbearable pain. A hoarse voice cut in. Besides this, practically nothing is known about it. The young man listened calmly, reaching out his hand to the crippled interlocutor. In the darkness stretched a terrifying smile. This power was never properly studied, so knowledge about it is catastrophically scarce. The young man moved forward, wrapped in a dense violet aura, and refuted a common misconception. This energy is not at all like that possessed by ordinary masters. Predatory eyes stared out from the gloom, It devours foreign power and cruelly tears it apart. The dark energy swelled to the size of a gigantic eye, distorting the very reality around it. In the utter void, violet flashes flickered. From beneath the blood-red strands flashed a cold, piercing gaze. The space was torn apart by a hellish whirl of fire and black lightning. A demonic chi broke free. He froze, gloomily looking at the half-mask in his hands. One quick movement, the mask lay on the face, and the eyes filled with a terrifying glow. Enemy fighters froze in animal terror. From beneath the palm flashed a predatory, fanged snarl. The curtain was lifted. With a wild roar, he rushed down like a black shadow. The blonde youth in red twitched and sharply turned around. Thick, suffocating darkness engulfed the yard, making him shudder at the thought that even the flame suddenly blackened. The pupil nervously contracted. Seeing the looming monster in a violet aura before him, he could barely breathe from wild, incomprehensible fear. Clenching his teeth until they cracked, the blonde was drenched in cold sweat. The warrior in red shouted fiercely from the roof, driving his men into battle. They froze in horror. The leader bared his teeth and promised death to anyone who retreated. Suddenly, the air was torn by a wild scream about a demon. From the thick violet aura emerged a terrifying figure in a mask. The light-haired warrior woman shuddered and shouted to her subordinates to flee. To her, they were just worthless trash. At that very moment, a squad of killers in black landed from behind. Panicked fighters rushed to the head of the pavilion, begging for orders. The woman with the eye patch kept a cool mind. She harshly commanded to hold positions, and the warriors instantly obeyed. In the darkness, the hieroglyphs of combat equipment flashed. The earth scorched, spewing mighty crimson light. The demon snarled fiercely through the flames. From the dense, dark aura above came a mocking voice, causing 3 men to flee. The fierce snarl growled that the performance had already begun, so the actors were forbidden to leave the stage. The earth was sharply pierced by violet flashes, ordering everyone to freeze. From the darkness emerged a huge demonic hand. One of the attackers screamed wildly as an unknown force bound his body. Someone grabbed his wrist tightly. The fighter with tattoos screamed in disgust, trying to fend off the sharp shadow blades around him. A sudden strike tore through the air, and the man was thrown back with a crack. Long clawed hands stretched out from beneath the ground, driving the panicking people into a trap. The bearded leader turned sharply. The remnants of the squad froze in horror, listening to the desperate pleas of their comrade to let him go. A hoarse order to run sounded, and pale claws lunged forward. The enemy grabbed the leader by the nape and cruelly slammed his face into the ground. The last fighter shouted as deathly pale fingers squeezed his throat and face with a death grip, pulling him into the gloom. From the darkness emerged a dense purple aura, from which pale hands of the dead blindly reached out. The man convulsed, tearing the silence with a frantic scream. In the center of the chaos, a demonic maw grinned, rasping a single verdict: to die on the spot. A big guy with skull tattoos convulsively grabbed his own face. His eye nearly burst from horror, and he managed to exhale only a denial when a spasm squeezed his throat, a sudden crimson flash. The bodies of the fighters began to burst from within with a crack, turning the yard into a bloody mess under their own death screams. Someone's pupil narrowed from absolute shock. Through the roar of slaughter, a panic realization broke through. This is an attack by the Blackbone sect. The girl warrior sharply turned, pointing tensely forward with her hand. Someone's scarred hand clenched with a crunch until the knuckles whitened. Another bloodied face contorted in agony over the abyss of dark energy. From the crimson sea of blood, bony hands climbed en masse, grabbing everything alive. And above the mansion's roofs, a giant cloud of impenetrable darkness already hung threateningly. A heavy step sharply broke the silence before the line of grim sectarians. Someone's palm stretched forward, releasing waves of dense violet aura. "Pray!" thundered from the vortex of black energy. The demonic figure raised its hands, and giant pale limbs with spikes burst out from beneath the earth. The monstrous paw crushed the enemy with a crunch, while the voice mercilessly ordered them to howl to the indifferent heavens. Above the bloody puddles, a monster with burning eyes grinned. It had come here at the call of victims tortured by the sect. A wild laugh shook the air, making the blonde warrior in red shudder. A huge blade of darkness struck him with a swing, but the boy did not retreat and sharply rushed straight into the deadly wave, teeth clenched to a grind. "What the hell are you standing for? Attack immediately!" A sharp order tore through the panic. The fighters with snarling faces and weapons in hand rushed forward. Meanwhile, one of the warriors looked around in shock. It turned out that the masters of the Blackbone sect here were twice as many as the intelligence had reported. The red-haired woman with a headband anxiously asked if they should help, but heard a firm refusal. Her eyes sharply widened in surprise. Suddenly, a bloodied Hugh appeared in the yard, causing the friends to shout her name. They immediately rushed to her, firmly grabbing her hands and thanking the heavens for her rescue. Hugh smiled warmly, despite the gruesome wound on her face, and admitted that she survived only thanks to the Lord of Darkness. The girl nearby nodded with relief. Now everyone finally understood that the Lord did not need any help. The frame darkened, displaying the studio logo on the screen. A man in a mask stood in purple flames, not yet revealing his true power. The women in black sharply turned around. One of them warned about the approaching experts of the Black Bone sect. The enemies were already jumping on the roofs, rejoicing that the prey had climbed into the mousetrap by itself. A muscular giant soared into the air, Mad Dog of the Black Claw. He snarled fiercely, swinging his wrist blades to tear the skin off the target with his own hands. A powerful burst of energy tore through the air. The stranger in white casually waved his hand, releasing a wide wave of violet light. The dog stunnedly spat out blood. The next moment, a merciless strike cut his body in half. A new voice coldly drawled that for such a loud nickname, the dog fell too quickly. The next expert rushed into attack, whirling a battle chain with a whistle. The ghost demon mantis shouted at the man on the rooftop spire, demanding to know who he was. Without waiting for an answer, he hurled a scythe straight at the enemy. 3 fighters fiercely charged forward, trying to recover after the instant death of their mighty comrade. They decided to overwhelm the enemy all at once. He didn't even turn around. He just raised his palm, gathering dark energy. A purple iron pillar tore through the space. The devastating wave instantly scattered the attackers, leaving behind a bloody mess and screams of horror. The tiger hunter Kanjamu barely held on to the roof tile, shouting to his men not to rush in recklessly, but to surround. The stranger stood motionless on the very tip of the roof. Shadows around him twisted, as if alive. Now the enemies hoped to survive and just buy time, waiting for his strength to run out. Suddenly the man slightly turned his head, flashing a purple eye from under a white mask. He was absolutely uninterested in the fight, because he felt the main thing. She was somewhere nearby. His eyes fiercely narrowed at the name Kim Ju. Taking advantage of this moment, Kanjamu cursed and jumped right onto his back. The hunter's heavy sword flew down with force. The wounded fighter burst into a fierce scream, demanding to know who was standing before him. The stranger in the white mask silently extended his hand, from which a dense violet aura struck. One lunge, and he was already gripping the screamer's throat with a death grip, lifting him off the ground. Darkness instantly fell around. The space vibrated from the concentration of energy. From the gloom, a giant fanged maw formed, making the victim curse inwardly. The shadow mercilessly crushed the man. A desperate cry about the cursed, demonic kin rang out, and the deadly technique struck at full force. The warrior in the red cloak breathed heavily, watching as small fragments of dark magic dissolved in the air. The yard turned into a slaughter, and only one of the fallen enemies barely managed to rasp that it was impossible. Blood on the stone slabs quickly mixed with a chilling violet liquid. The mutilated bodies remained lying in these dark puddles. Suddenly the blonde recoiled backward. From the dead mass, a gigantic, monstrous hand suddenly burst out. The woman grimaced with disgust at the sharp, unbearable stench. She peeked out the door at the twisted body, complaining that this smell literally burned her nostrils. High above the roofs, a dark figure slowly hovered. The woman's eyes widened in shock, her teeth nervously gritted. The stranger's aura simply crushed with its weight. In the sky, a man in a mask sparkled, completely enveloped in deadly purple energy. Until now, she believed that only her master could reach such an incomprehensible level. But she quickly composed herself, remembering that she herself had long broken the ceiling of human possibilities. For the sake of this secret technique, she had burned years of her own life. From her bloodied eye burst a red glow, and her face was distorted by a maniacal smile. She screamed that she would first finish off this monster, and then, with a wild scream, promised to slit absolutely everyone who had ever mocked her. At that very second, a dark shadow materialized behind her back. The woman sharply looked back when a cold voice whispered by her ear that she had finally been found. A stranger in a mask loomed over the bloodied girl, and muttered that there was another option. Her pupil widened in shock when her real name sounded from the darkness, Seiyukwa. Instead of answering, she instantly struck with bloody red energy. A powerful explosion shattered everything around into splinters. Yukwa froze in the very epicenter of the destruction. She screamed madly. How dare he, and who told him that? completely losing control. Cold sweat rolled down her face. She wildly swiped her hand, but the enemy's voice mockingly ordered her not to amuse him. A black silhouette playfully dodged her deadly attack. From the darkness, a whisper sounded again. Did she really think that the hidden name would save her? He asked if she truly hoped to hide all her past sins. Her mind was immediately flooded with screams, pleas of tortured victims, and curses of destroyed families. The very word atrocity instantly ignited a beastly rage in her eyes. The enemy confidently stepped out of the black puddle towards her. A voice from the darkness mockingly allowed him to try to resist. A purple aura expanded into a terrifying grimace, demanding a fight at the edge of her last strength. Light hair flashed from a sharp jerk. His face was distorted by wild fury, and his eyes flared with bloody fire. Gathering all his might, he brought down a gigantic energy blade. He roared, cutting through the air, demanding that his question be answered first. The space was torn in half by a blinding collision. The shockwave cut through the sky, throwing the enemy away. A mighty, fiery explosion flared on the ground, sweeping away everything in its path. Thick black smoke clouds rose heavily above the ruins. From the epicenter of the flames emerged a demonic silhouette, growling hoarsely. "And you still dare to judge me?" He bent heavily, bearing bloodied fangs and a predatory snarl. Opening an eye in a fit of madness, he ominously whispered that he would start by taking one. The bloodied blonde froze in shock, unable to believe what he was seeing. He bit into his own hand in horror, where instead of human fingers now protruded black, mangled claws, dripping with blood. Suddenly the space was split by the crackle of violet energy. Ahead rose a tall figure with long black hair. The stranger's face distorted, turning into a black abyss with bared fangs, and the blonde behind simply froze in terror. A deafening rumble tore through the silence, and a terrifying dark aura filled everything around with a pulsating explosion.